Drop the question lilt. You know that tiny lift at the end of a sentence, the one that turns a statement into a question even though you're not asking anything? I think we should try the new approach. That upward curl is a leash you're handing other people without realizing it. It signals uncertainty, which triggers doubt in the listener's mind before your words even land. The moment your voice rises at the finish, you've already told them you don't believe what you just said, so why should they? This happens everywhere, in meetings, dates, job interviews, conversations with family. A woman says, "I have 5 years of experience," and the hiring manager mentally checks the box marked unsure. A man pitches an idea with that lilt, and suddenly his own idea sounds like a rumor he heard. The pattern runs so deep that people who do it often have no idea they're doing it. You can feel confident, competent, and completely certain, and still sabotage yourself with that tiny vocal choice. Here's the concrete fix. Before you speak, decide if you're making a statement or asking a question. If it's a statement, let your voice drop or stay flat at the end. Not stern, not aggressive, just complete. Let the period do its job. Practice it in low-stakes moments first. Texts, casual conversations, notes to yourself, even talking to your dog. Your voice will feel strange, almost blunt the first few times. That jarring sensation is the feeling of being taken seriously. That's what certainty actually sounds like when it leaves your mouth, and it changes how people listen to you before you've even finished your thought. And every sentence downward. Walk into any room and track who people actually listen to. It's almost never the loudest voice, but the one whose pitch drops at the end of a sentence like a full stop, not a question mark. When your voice falls, something primal shifts in the listener's brain. It signals certainty. It says you've already decided, that the thought is complete, that there's nowhere left to convince. Rising inflection is a question. It's doubt masquerading as confidence. It's you asking permission to exist in the conversation. Downward inflection is a period, a fact checking in. Listen to a surgeon, a CEO, anyone with unshakable authority, and you'll hear that same gravitational pull. The voice lands instead of floats. Here's where most people stumble. They get nervous, they speed up, and their pitch climbs at the end like they're asking, "Is this okay?" Even when they're stating something true, even when they're the expert in the room, your listener's brain hears that uptick and it registers uncertainty, and uncertainty spreads like wildfire through the entire conversation. Start noticing where you lift, when you say your name, when you make an offer, when you state an opinion you actually hold. Practice dropping that final note like you're placing a stone, not aggressive or forced, just settled and sure. The weird magic is this. When you sound like you believe yourself, other people's brains follow without question. They accept it. They don't need you to convince them because your voice already did. Authority isn't loud, it's just sure. Cut the apology preamble. Someone at work makes a small mistake and sends you a half-dozen lines about how sorry they are, how badly they feel, how they've never done this before, how they've been so stressed. By the time they get to the actual problem, you're already thinking about something else. That preamble is a respect killer. It doesn't earn forgiveness, it broadcasts doubt. Serious people don't narrate their own shame. They identify the issue, explain what caused it in 30 seconds flat, and move straight to the fix. I missed the deadline because I underestimated the scope. Here's the revised timeline. No apology theater, no self-flagellation, no waiting for permission to move forward. The psychological trick is counterintuitive. Brevity and directness read as confidence, which reads as competence, which makes people trust you faster than a 5-minute guilt spiral ever will. When you lead with the apology preamble, you're asking the other person to comfort you. When you cut it, you're showing them you've already moved past the emotional phase and into solution mode. This isn't about never apologizing, it's about naming it once, owning it cleanly, then stopping. The people who take you seriously are the ones who notice you don't waste their time performing regret. They notice you're already building the bridge back to normal without making them sit through your feelings first. That moment is when they decide you're someone worth taking seriously. Not because you're perfect, but because you're efficient enough to fix things without theater. Competence whispers louder than guilt ever screams. Delete every hedging qualifier. Someone says, I think maybe we should probably try to sort of consider the idea that, and you're already mentally checking out. They haven't even finished the sentence, and your brain files them under not confident. Hedging qualifiers are the verbal equivalent of saying, I don't really believe this either, so you shouldn't either. Words like sort of, kind of, maybe, I guess, a bit, arguably, in my opinion, hopefully, tend to, seem to, they're tiny permission slips you hand to your listener to dismiss you. When you say, this is kind of a good idea, you've already given them an escape route. The moment you qualify, you've planted doubt. Now here's what actually shifts. Take that same thought and say it straight. This works. We should do this. I've seen this succeed. No softening, no apologies baked into syntax. Your brain will fight you on this at first because it feels aggressive or impolite, but it's not. It's clarity. Certainty is magnetic. People lean towards someone who sounds like they've thought something through and landed on solid ground. You don't need to be obnoxious about it or bulldoze or pretend you know everything. Just remove the verbal escape hatches you've built into every other sentence. When you eliminate hedging, something strange happens. You sound like you've already won the argument before you've even made it. People take seriously those who take themselves seriously first, and that shift starts the moment you stop apologizing for your own voice. Answer only what was asked. Most people talk like they're filling dead air. Someone asks a simple question, do you want coffee? And you get their entire coffee philosophy, a story about their cousin's espresso machine, and a 10-minute detour about sleep schedules. By the time they've surfaced, the person who asked has mentally checked out. They didn't want a TED Talk. They wanted an answer. When you give exactly what was requested and nothing more, something shifts in how you're perceived. You seem controlled, respectful of time, and genuinely confident, because insecure people tend to over-explain as a way of proving they know things. Silence and restraint read as power. A job interviewer asks about your greatest weakness. You give a tight, honest answer in 2 sentences. The person who rambles for 3 minutes, then backtracks, then qualifies everything sounds defensive. You sound like you've made peace with reality. This works in meetings, texts, conversations with authority figures, even arguments. Someone pushes you to justify yourself. Don't take the bait. Answer the specific question. Stop. That empty space where you'd normally keep talking, that's where respect lives. It's almost eerie how many people fill it reflexively, as if silence means they didn't say enough. But people who matter, people who've seen real confidence, they notice when someone knows when to quit. You become the person who doesn't waste words, who listens carefully enough to know what's actually being asked, and who trusts that a clean answer needs no garnish. The world remembers people who know when to stop more than people who know how to keep going. That's the real difference between noise and signal. The one-breath answer. Someone asks you a question in a meeting and your instinct kicks in. Fill the air fast, maybe ramble a little, hedge with qualifiers, throw in a story that might land. But watch what happens when you do the opposite. Breathe, pause for one full breath, then answer. That single moment of silence before you speak does something odd to how people perceive you. It signals you are not scrambling, not afraid of dead air, not performing. When you pause, your brain catches up to your mouth and you speak with less filler. No ums, no runaway sentences spiraling nowhere. The listener's brain gets a microsecond to brace for something important, and it does arrive because you gave yourself time to choose the right words instead of the first ones. Here's the thing. People interpret that pause as confidence, even if you are terrified underneath. Confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the appearance of choice, and you made one. You chose to think before you spoke. This works everywhere. A text to your boss, an answer to a tough question at dinner, pushing back on someone's assumption. A single breath before you respond shifts the dynamic completely. No apologies for the silence, no nervous laughter filling the gap. Your credibility rises because you sound like someone who knows what they are about, someone deliberate and clear. The pause is not wasted time. It is earned time, and people can hear the difference between a voice that is thinking and a voice that is just hoping something sticks. Explain once, then stop. You've been in the room where someone restarts their story for the third time, voice climbing, defensiveness bleeding through like sweat, and that's exactly when you stop believing them. Repetition doesn't persuade, it broadcasts fear. It says the person talking doesn't trust their own words enough to let them sit. Serious people operate differently. They deliver the thought once, cleanly, with the kind of calm that comes from actually meaning what they say. Then they do the hardest thing. They wait. They hold the silence. They let your brain absorb it or reject it without stepping in to rescue the explanation. No hedging, no, let me rephrase that, no nervous filler words that leak doubt into the room. This works because people don't evaluate ideas in a vacuum. They evaluate the person delivering them. And when someone keeps restating, what you hear underneath is, I'm not confident this landed. Or worse, I don't believe this myself. Credibility is built in that first clean pass, not in the three that follow. The real trap is that silence activates your anxiety like an alarm. Your nervous system wants to fill it, wants to add just one more example, one more softener, one more hedge. That impulse will cost you every time. Your job is to explain what you mean in one flowing, unhurried delivery. Make eye contact, then stop. If they need more, they'll ask. If they don't, you've just demonstrated something rare, someone certain enough in their own words to let them breathe without rescue. That stillness is not silence. That's credibility. That's what makes people lean in and listen harder. Never repeat yourself unprompted. Watch what happens next time you make a point in a meeting and nobody immediately responds. The silence lands wrong, so your brain panics. You say it again, rewording it, adding examples, leaning forward like you didn't get heard the first time. And here's what just happened. You signaled that your own words weren't enough. You doubt-checked your own authority before anyone else had a chance to. The room picks up on that hesitation like a dog senses fear. Suddenly you look less credible, not more. Confident people state once and wait. They sit with the uncomfortable pause. They let their words have weight by not rushing to fill the silence with a reprise. This isn't about being stubborn or refusing to clarify. If someone genuinely asks, repeat it fresh and clear. But unprompted repetition reads as anxiety. It reads as, I'm not sure you believed me the first time, so here it is again. People who take themselves seriously trust the room to have heard them. They trust their thought enough to let it land and breathe. The next time you feel that urge to restate, notice what's driving it. Usually it's your discomfort with the pause, not the room's confusion. That distinction matters because it means you're editing yourself for comfort, not clarity. The people who own their ideas don't perform. They speak once and then they wait. That restraint alone will shift how you're perceived. From someone selling an idea to someone who knows it cold. The difference is thin but visible to anyone watching, and it changes everything. The 3-second reply delay. Your phone buzzes. Your thumb is already moving to type. But stop there for 3 seconds. Not because you're playing games with someone's head, but because instant replies signal desperation, not authority. Watch how you unconsciously judge someone who answers every message within seconds. Maybe they're eager, maybe they're bored, maybe they don't have anything else occupying their mind. Now flip it. Someone who takes a breath, considers their words, and responds thoughtfully immediately reads as controlled as someone in possession of their own time. When you reply too fast, you hand over your power to the other person. They learn that they can interrupt your day whenever they want, that you're sitting there waiting for their next ping. A 3-second pause isn't coldness. It's proof you have other things demanding your attention. You have priorities beyond their message. You're not at their beck and call. This works in texts, emails, Slack, even in-person conversations where you normally jump in right away. That micro pause before you speak makes you sound measured instead of reactive, thoughtful instead of jittery. Speed reads as anxiety. Slowness reads as certainty. People trust deliberation. They respect the person who can wait before responding because waiting signals that you weren't sitting there hoping for their text. You don't need to drag it out to 5 seconds or make it theatrical, just enough pause that you're clearly thinking, not just reflexively reacting. The pause is also a small act of self-respect. In a world where everyone's vibrating for attention, the person who can sit with 3 seconds of quiet before speaking owns the entire room. Let awkward silence stand. You finish making your point in a meeting. 3 seconds pass. Your nervous system screams at you to fill the void, add a joke, soften what you said, throw in a filler word. Most people cave. They talk over the quiet like it's a hole in the floor. Here's what actually happens when you don't. Silence becomes power. The other person feels the weight of what you just said. They have to sit with it. They can't dismiss it as casual. When you're comfortable enough to let dead air exist, you signal something most people never signal. That you're not desperate for approval, not anxious about being heard, not performing. Desperation is loud. Certainty is quiet. Your brain wants to fill silence because our ancestors were wired to fear it meant danger. Someone was hunting. Someone was angry. But in a boardroom or a living room, silence doesn't mean threat. It means you trust what you said enough not to defend it again immediately. The person across from you has to lean in and decide what the quiet means. That tiny shift from you as the talker to them as the one who must respond flips the entire dynamic in your favor. You didn't force them. You didn't manipulate. Next time you say something that matters, count to 3 in your head. Let them sit with it. You'll feel discomfort crawl up your spine. That's your fear of judgment working overtime. Stay in it anyway. That's where real weight lives. Refuse to fill silence. Someone asks you something and your mouth goes dry. The silence yawns open and your instinct screams to talk, to fill it, to prove you're thinking. Stop. Watch any room where real negotiation happens, where stakes matter. The nervous amateur drowns the quiet with words. The person being taken seriously just lets it breathe. That gap you're terrified of, it's working for you whether you know it or not. When you don't rescue the silence, the other person feels the weight of what they just asked themselves. They doubt. They wonder if you're thinking so deeply you don't even need to rush. They sit there and fill the void themselves, often handing you information they never planned to share. Leverage, truth, confession. Your silence reads as bulletproof confidence. Even if you're thinking about lunch, they assume you're somewhere else entirely, somewhere they haven't been invited. People interpret emptiness as power, as someone unflustered enough to not need their approval to sit still. Here's the trap. Silence doesn't feel bad to everyone. It feels bad to anxious people, to anyone insecure about approval, to someone solid in themselves. Silence is just air, and they'll wait, they'll talk. They'll offer your gap-filling signals, something that tanks respect. I need comfort right now. Tension undoes me. I am not okay. When you hold, you flip the message entirely. Next time someone challenges you or asks for something, hit them with a genuine question back, then count 3 seconds before speaking again. It will feel eternal to you. To them, it will feel like you actually see them. That's where real respect lives, in your willingness to refuse nervousness. Strategic silence after speaking. Watch what happens in a meeting when someone finishes a sentence and immediately fills the air again. They keep talking, apologize, over-explain, and everyone learns that what they just said wasn't important enough to sit with. You can do something sharper. Say what you mean, then stop. Close your mouth. Let 3, 4, maybe 5 full seconds pass before anyone else speaks. Most people find silence physically uncomfortable. Our brains scream at us to rescue the moment, but that discomfort is exactly where your power lives. When you stay quiet after a real statement, you signal that you're not nervous, not seeking approval, not scrambling to fill space with filler. You sound like someone who weighs their words. The other person's brain fills the vacuum with weight and importance. They lean in. They wonder what you meant. They assume you know something they don't. It's not manipulation. It's just punctuation. Your silence says, I said that on purpose, and now you have to decide if you agree or disagree rather than watching me scramble to convince you. The trap most people fall into is the need to keep talking when they feel uncertain, but that need broadcasts uncertainty faster than any stammer. Your stillness does the opposite. It radiates calm, control, someone comfortable enough with their own thought to let it hang there. The trick isn't complicated. Almost nobody does it. Next time you make a point, speak and then breathe. Let the silence sit there like it belongs. Watch how people take you differently. They'll mirror your certainty back to you, and that shift happens in the space you refused to fill. Pause before the punchline. Watch what happens when someone rushes a joke. The same story that kills when told slow lands flat. The delay isn't a flaw, it's pure architecture. When you pause just before the moment that matters, you create a tiny vacuum in the space between you and them. Your listener's mind leans in. Their attention sharpens. The longer you hold that silence, the more weight they assign to what comes next. A nervous person talks faster and fills every gap because the silence makes them uncomfortable. A person who knows their material can hold the room quiet without flinching. That silence becomes proof you trust what you're about to say, that you don't need to defend it yet. Here's where it gets useful. Pauses work everywhere, not just in comedy or storytelling. Before you answer a tough question in a meeting, pause for 2 full seconds. Before you deliver hard news, pause. Before you state your boundary, pause. You're not stalling or buying time. You're signaling that this matters enough to be deliberate about it. People unconsciously read that as confidence, not hesitation or weakness. Their brain registers it before their thinking mind catches up. They start treating your words as something worth the wait, something earned rather than thrown at them. Pair that pause with direct eye contact, and you've basically told them, I'm not asking for permission, I'm giving you a chance to keep up. That small gap between your thought and your voice is where real authority lives. Try it tomorrow in a conversation where something actually matters. The visible thinking pause. Someone asks you a question and you answer in half a second. Your brain was already running on that track before the words even landed. The person across from you notices, not consciously maybe, but they feel it in their bones. Speed reads as reflex, as autopilot, as someone who isn't really considering what they're asking. Now flip it. They ask, and you go quiet for 2-3 full seconds. Your eyes drift slightly. You're clearly working through the actual question, not just retrieving an answer you've rehearsed a dozen times. Suddenly, you're not just answering, you're thinking, and they can see it happening. That pause costs you nothing and gains you everything because it signals respect for the question itself, for them, for the conversation. This isn't hesitation or uncertainty, it's deliberate restraint. You're taking them seriously enough to slow down your own machinery. People trust thought more than they trust speed. A surgeon who pauses before cutting instills confidence. A leader who sits with a hard question for a moment sounds like someone who weighs consequences and doesn't flinch from complexity. But here's the real trick. That pause has to be visible, not a nervous tick or a stutter. A conscious settling into the question, maybe a slight nod, maybe your gaze softens as you're turning it over. Your body language needs to say, I'm thinking, not stalling. Do this once per conversation and watch how differently people listen to what comes next. They lean in, they stop their restless scrolling. You've signaled that what you're about to say was earned, not borrowed from habit. Speak in declarative sentences. Listen to yourself in your next meeting. Catch how often statements curl up into questions with that rising lilt. The project's behind schedule. We should probably pivot. That inflection is permission you're handing them to doubt you before you finish. Declarative sentences don't ask permission. They land. They say, I know what I'm talking about. When you say, this approach works, your nervous system settles into the words like you believe them, and your listener feels that ground beneath the idea. When you say, this approach works, you've already signaled uncertainty, hunting their face for approval, and they sense it instantly. Everyone's brain is wired to detect confidence gaps. A question mark at the end of a statement reads as weakness, even if everything you said was sharp. This isn't about arrogance or killing dialogue. It's about removing the tremor before it reaches someone else's ear. You can still invite feedback, still collaborate, still be genuinely open, but do it after the statement lands, not during it. Notice the weight difference. We need to cut costs by 15% versus we should probably try to reduce costs, maybe 15%, same information. Different gravity. The first makes people lean in because you're not asking permission to occupy space. Strip the question marks from sentences that aren't actually questions. Credibility doesn't come from sounding certain about everything. It comes from sounding certain about what you mean and letting that certainty breathe without apology. State terms, not requests. Watch what happens when you shift from asking permission to announcing reality. Last week, someone said to me, "Would you mind if I sent this on Thursday?" And my brain immediately started listing reasons to say no. Then someone else walked in and said, "I'm sending this Thursday," and I nodded without hesitation. Same action, completely different power dynamic. When you frame something as a question, you hand the other person a veto switch. They can negotiate, delay, push back, turn it into a discussion. But when you state terms calmly, with zero apology in your voice, you move from supplicant to peer, not rude, not aggressive, just settled. Watch this in job interviews. The desperate candidate asks, "What's the salary range?" while the serious one says, "I'm looking for 90 to 110 depending on scope." Notice how your brain receives each one differently. The first invites haggling, the second invites agreement or a counteroffer from someone who understands you've already claimed ground. This works because stating terms broadcasts that you know your value. You've thought it through. You're not begging for a favor. You're proposing a transaction both sides can live with. People respect that move. They take you seriously because you took yourself seriously first. Start counting how many of your real boundaries you've softened into questions. Can you start at 9? Should we discuss payment upfront? What if we try this? Each one is an open door for friction and renegotiation. State the terms instead. Watch how the friction collapses and how quickly respect follows. Say no without explanation. Watch what happens the next time someone asks you for something and you feel the pressure to justify your refusal. Your boss asks if you can squeeze in that extra report. A friend wants to borrow money. A colleague wants to grab lunch when you're already stretched thin. The instinct is automatic. Build a fortress of reasons. I'm too busy. I have a prior commitment. My finances are tight. But here's what you're actually doing without realizing it. You're inviting them to negotiate. Every single reason you offer becomes a door they can try to unlock. "Oh, but it'll only take 30 minutes. I can repay you next week. We could do a quick bite instead." The moment you explain yourself, you've transformed your no into a starting point for discussion rather than a real boundary. The people who seem most serious, most untouchable, most genuinely in control don't perform their reasoning. They say no and they stop, cleanly, not rudely. "I can't do that. That doesn't work for me." No. Notice the silence that follows. It feels uncomfortable. Your nervous system screams to fill it with justification, with apology, with softening language. Don't. That discomfort is actually respect forming in real time. When you refuse to negotiate your boundary by explaining it away, you signal something both simple and disarming. Your time and energy are genuinely non-negotiable. You're not asking permission to say no. You're not offering yourself up for debate. The other person absorbs that message immediately. Whether they like it or not, they will take you seriously. Refuse to over-explain a refusal. Notice what happens inside you the moment someone asks for something and you feel the no rising in your chest. Then panic whispers that you need to soften it with reasons. "I can't because I have too much work. And honestly, the timing is awful, and I promised my friend I'd help them move, and I'm just exhausted right now." The second you layer on justifications, something breaks. Your no shrinks. It sounds negotiable, defensive, almost like you're asking permission to disappoint them. People detect that hesitation the way predators detect a limp, and suddenly they're circling back with counter-arguments, sympathy pitches, or creative workarounds. Your boundary crumbles because you made it sound like it was never really there at all. The harder truth, a clean refusal needs no architecture. "I can't do that," or even simpler, "that doesn't work for me," lands with weight because it doesn't invite negotiation. When you stop explaining, you announce that your decision isn't a puzzle to solve with the right persuasion. It's finished, sealed, non-negotiable. There's actual authority in that restraint. People who say yes to everything are hollowed out and bitter. People who refuse quietly and without apology become the ones others genuinely respect. not because they're cold, but because they're coherent with themselves. They don't argue with their own no, so nobody else bothers trying. Next time you need to decline, practice stopping after the first sentence. Let the silence carry the weight. Watch how the dynamic shifts when people realize you actually mean it. Coherence is contagious. Name your price flatly. You're in a negotiation and someone asks what you want. Most people hedge. They say, well, I was thinking maybe around, or they pause too long, hoping the other person will guess and offer more. That hesitation signals uncertainty, and uncertainty kills respect faster than almost anything else. The moment you pause is the moment they start thinking you don't know your own value. Here's the shift. State your number cleanly and stop. No apology, no explanation wrapping around it like a nervous scarf. 50,000? 25 an hour. 3 weeks of lead time. Flat, neutral, done. The flatness matters because it communicates an absence of doubt. When you say something as though it's simply fact, not negotiable, not desperate, just the reality of what you offer, people's brains treat it differently. A number spoken with certainty sounds like it came from somewhere solid. Specificity itself signals authority. Nobody who's uncertain picks an exact figure and delivers it without filler. Vague people say somewhere in that range. Serious people name it. Add a tiny pause after, not a nervous one, just the kind where you're letting the words sit and do their work. Then let them respond. Don't fill silence with justification or sweetening the deal. You've made your case by being clear. This works in salary talks, freelance rates, and personal boundaries. When someone knows you know your worth and you're willing to walk away, the entire dynamic shifts. They either meet it or they don't, but they're no longer questioning whether you're serious or just hoping they'll take pity. Anchor the number first. Walk into a negotiation and someone throws out 85,000. That number lands in your brain like an anchor dropped in sand, and suddenly every counter you make gets filtered through it, even if you wanted 120. That opening bid is rewriting the whole conversation without anyone saying so. Here's what shifts the game. You go first. If you're asking for something, name a number before they can plant their own. Not wildly inflated, that reads as panic and kills credibility, but genuinely high within the realm of reason. When you anchor first, you shift the entire negotiation field. Their counteroffer will land closer to your starting point than to their original target. Research on salary negotiations showed people who anchored first with a solid number walked away with significantly higher agreements than those who waited, but the stickier part is how it lands psychologically. People who anchor feel more serious too. Confidence sounds like you have the math done. It sounds like you know your worth, and that carries completely differently than I'm flexible or what were you thinking. The trick scales beautifully down. Propose a specific meeting time instead of asking when they're free. Suggest a concrete budget before a vendor quotes you. Name your deadline instead of asking theirs. You're not being pushy. You're being clear, giving your listener a frame to work inside, and that frame becomes invisible architecture for what feels possible next. What sounds decided gets taken seriously. What sounds tentative gets picked apart. The number you say first is doing more work than you realize. Use precise numbers. In a room full of people, watch what lands harder, around 40% or 42%. Both might be estimates, but the second one rings different. It feels like someone actually looked at the data, counted, cared enough to measure twice. Your brain doesn't register precision as a guess. It registers it as evidence of rigor. Someone who says, I've gotten about 1,000 emails this year sounds soft, vague. Someone who says, I've received 1,347 emails since January sounds like they've done the work, like they live in the specifics. You don't need to memorize exact figures. Just naming one tells people you've paid attention. Vagueness signals either carelessness or doubt. Both make listeners hesitate. Precision signals confidence and competence, and that shift happens instantly. When you cite approximately $5 million in annual losses, the listener's brain assumes you've looked at a spreadsheet. Say roughly 5 million, and it feels like you're rounding a hunch. This isn't manipulation, it's clarity made visible. The brain's specificity bias runs so deep that precise wrong numbers often persuade more than round right ones, which is why accuracy matters when you do cite them. But when you're in the ballpark, don't hide behind many or several or a lot. Name the closest actual number you know. We tested this with 34 people beats we tested this with a bunch of people. This takes about 18 minutes beats this takes a bit. Numbers transform abstract promises into concrete things you can touch. They make you sound like someone who has measured the world and thought carefully about what it means. The specificity credibility jump. Say you're in a meeting and someone says, I read some research on this. Heads stay down. Then someone else says, a 2019 meta-analysis of 847 participants found that X increases Y by 34%. Suddenly, everyone is writing it down. The numbers did no actual work, but they rewired how seriously people treat your words. This is the specificity credibility jump, and it works because vagueness sounds like guessing, while precision sounds like knowing. Your brain equates detail with confidence, research, and lived experience. A vague claim feels soft. A specific one feels like you've already done the hard part. Even if the specific number is slightly wrong, off by a few percentage points, the damage to your credibility is smaller than the damage from saying some people think or probably works. People don't fact-check specificity the way they fact-check claims, so they trust the detail first and verify later, if at all. Here's the move. Before you stake a claim, add one concrete number, date, or measurable outcome, not made up, real data, even if it's from your own small-scale experience. I've worked with 23 clients on this beats lots of clients. It took me 3 weeks to learn this beats takes time. This improves focus by about 40 minutes in testing beats improves focus. The specificity doesn't have to be shocking. It just has to exist. It tells people you've actually measured something, counted something, paid attention. That's when they start taking you seriously, not because the number is big, but because you cared enough to know it exactly. Small precision builds trust faster than big promises ever will. Cite the source precisely. You're in a meeting and someone says, studies show people are more productive in the morning. Everyone nods. Then you say, a 2019 study from the University of Colorado found that circadian rhythm peaks vary by individual, but cortisol rises predictably between 6 and 8 a.m., which correlates with alertness in about 70% of the population. The room shifts. Suddenly, you sound credible, not opinionated. That specificity does the work. When you cite the source, the publication, the year, and the researcher's name, you stop sounding like you're guessing and start sounding like you've done the work. People respect that precision. It signals you didn't inherit a half-remembered fact from a podcast. You went looking. Here's the psychology. When you give someone an actual citation, they can't dismiss you by saying, well, I heard something different. They'd have to argue with the research itself, not your claim. That's a much higher bar. Vagueness breeds doubt. People say, or I read somewhere, makes you sound unsure, testing the idea rather than standing behind it. But a 2012 Harvard study on persuasion by Robert Cialdini, that's armor. Even if someone disagrees, they know you're not making it up. Detail signals you've done the legwork, and our brains trust details because they're harder to fabricate. So next time you're making a point that matters, hunt down the real source, the year, the name. Your credibility doesn't just rise in that moment, it compounds across every conversation that follows. Reference a specific prior detail. You're in a meeting and someone mentions a project they brought up 2 weeks ago. The fact that you remember it, not vaguely, but the actual detail, shifts something in the room. They sit straighter. You weren't just half listening, you were actually tracking them. This is one of the quietest power moves you can pull off, and it costs almost nothing. When you reference something small from a previous conversation, a name they mentioned, a worry they had, a small win they told you about, you send a signal that lands deeper than any firm handshake ever could. It says, you matter enough for me to hold on to what you said. In a world of half attention and surface level chat that lands like respect, the magic isn't in the memory itself, it's in the implication. People assume that if you remember the details, you probably also understand the weight behind them. You're not just hearing words, you're tracking patterns, caring about follow-through, building a real picture of who they are. That kind of attention is rare enough now that it reads as quiet authority without ever trying to flex. The trap is making it feel forced or weird. Hey, remember 3 months ago when you said your dog's name was Max? That feels calculated and auditing, but weave it in naturally. How's that Max doing with the new trainer? You've done the work of remembering without broadcasting that you did. They feel genuinely held, not inspected. Small details stick with serious people. Reference them naturally and watch how differently you get treated in return. Give the diagnosis, not symptoms. Watch what happens in a meeting when someone says, I'm stressed and overwhelmed, versus I've hit the limit of what I can do in this time frame with the current resources. The second person sounds like they've thought through the problem. The first sounds like they're venting. Your brain jumps to different conclusions about who knows what they're talking about. When you lead with the root cause, the diagnosis, instead of how you feel, people assume you've already done the hard thinking work. They trust you faster. A manager doesn't care that you're anxious about a project deadline. They care that the scope requires 3 weeks, but the window is 2. A client doesn't need to hear you're frustrated. They need to hear that the bottleneck is approval cycles, not execution. The shift is subtle, but it matters. Symptoms are what everyone sees. They're noisy and universal. Everybody gets tired. Everybody feels stuck. Everybody complains. A diagnosis means you've looked under the hood. You've traced the problem to its source. You've separated signal from noise. This is what serious people sound like. They don't broadcast internal weather. They describe the machinery. They don't ask for sympathy, they ask for solutions. They sound like they've already half solved it before they ask for help. Next time you're about to explain why something isn't working, pause. Skip the feelings. Ask yourself what's actually broken, what's actually missing, what actually needs to change. Then say that thing instead. Watch how differently people respond when they hear clarity instead of complaint, precision instead of pain, the single point argument. Watch what happens when someone walks into a room and says, I have 3 reasons why this won't work, versus someone who says, this won't work because of one thing. and it's this. The second person walks away looking like they know something. The first person looks like they're hedging. People respect clarity more than comprehensiveness, and that gap matters far more than you'd think. When you anchor everything to a single crystalline point, your listener's brain doesn't have to juggle 3 threads. It follows one line straight to the conclusion. Multiple arguments feel defensive, like you're throwing darts hoping one sticks. One argument feels like you've already done the work, like you've filtered for what actually matters and had the discipline to cut the rest. The person listening doesn't have to think, they just have to follow. This doesn't mean ignoring other reasons. It means choosing the one that carries the most weight and letting it carry the load. Maybe it's cost, maybe it's timing, maybe it's that the model they're using is outdated. Whatever it is, name it directly and stop. Let silence sit. People will ask questions if they need to. Most won't. Most will just nod and think you're someone who knows what matters. That single point becomes the frame they remember, the hook they tell someone else about. When you speak next, they'll expect that same directness. You've trained them to listen differently. The real trick isn't being right. It's sounding like someone who is already filtered for what's actually important, and that filters how seriously they take you going forward. Volunteer the counter-argument first. You walk into a pitch meeting and before the other person can fire up their skepticism, you say, "Look, I know the obvious objection here. The cost is real, and for smaller teams, it might not make sense right now." Watch what happens. Their shoulders drop a little. The defensive crouch dissolves. You just took away their job. When you name the thing someone was ready to argue about, you flip the power dynamic entirely. They were bracing for a fight. You handed them an open door instead. This works because most persuasion fails not on the strength of your idea, but on the listener's need to prove you wrong. That need is primal. It's safety, it's intelligence, it's keeping their world intact. But when you say the hard thing first, you've already done it for them. There is nothing left to defend against. The research here is clean. People trust you more when you acknowledge what doesn't work about your own position. It signals confidence, not desperation. A desperate person hides the cracks. A serious person walks you through them. So before you make your case, whether it's a project proposal, a behavior change, or asking for a favor, spend 30 seconds naming the real downside or the legitimate concern, not to be falsely modest, not to seem balanced, but because the moment someone no longer feels like they're being sold, they start actually listening. They move from opponent to ally. That shift is where all the real persuasion lives. It's the difference between being defended against and being truly heard. Concede the small point. You're in a conversation and you feel the push. The other person waiting for you to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to show they didn't land a hit. That's the moment most people dig in. You don't have to. There's a move that works like a judo flip. Find the one small thing they said that's actually true, name it directly, and move on. Not as a performance of humility, just matter of fact. You're right, I was late that day. Then straight into what actually matters. What happens next is strange and quiet. The other person loses their edge. They were braced for a fight. You handed them agreement instead. The tension flattens, and now you have credibility. Because you're not someone who needs to win every inch. You're someone who can see what's real and say it. People trust that. They trust people who aren't scared of being wrong about small things because it signals you probably aren't bluffing about the big ones. The trick lives in the specificity, Don't concede vague stuff like, I see your point. Pick the actual grain of truth, one sentence, then pivot to what you want to discuss. It works because it signals something without saying it. You're secure enough to be accurate instead of defensive. That's how people learn to take you seriously, not by being right about everything, but by being honest about what you actually got wrong and moving forward without flinching. Reject the false dichotomy. Watch what happens the next time someone corners you with, "So are you saying yes or no?" Right there is where most people crumble. They pick a side and lock in, even when the truth is messier and more textured than any two-choice frame allows. Here's the move. Name the false choice out loud, then offer the actual landscape. Someone says, "You either agree with me or you're against me." You say, "I see three things here: what we agree on, where we genuinely differ, and what we still don't know." Suddenly, you're not trapped. You're in charge of the frame. People who get taken seriously don't fight on the other person's terms. They expand the field. When your boss asks, "Are you committed to this job or not?" instead of a defensive yes or no, you say, "I'm committed to doing excellent work, and I'd like clarity on what success looks like so I can actually deliver it." Notice the shift. You're not answering the loaded question. You're redefining what the conversation is even about. This moves people because it signals clarity and sovereignty. You're not flinching. You're not scrambling to fit into someone else's box. Most people operate in binaries because it feels safe and simple, almost like a reflex, a mental shortcut that lets them stop thinking. When you reject that comfort, you sound like someone who actually thinks, who spent real time with the mess and contradiction of the real world. Complexity reads as seriousness. The person across from you feels the difference immediately. You're not playing the game they offered. You're playing a smarter one, and that shift in power is unmissable. The confident, "I don't know." Watch someone's face when you ask them a question they can't answer and they actually pause. Not fill the void with noise, but sit in it. Most people feel that silence like a threat. They scramble, hedge, invent half-truths, or worse, bluff. You do the opposite. You say, "I don't know," and then you stop talking. The air gets quiet, and something shifts in how people perceive you. It sounds backwards because we're trained to believe that admitting gaps makes you look weak. The truth is meaner. People respect certainty far more than they respect false confidence, and they sniff out the difference instantly. A stuttering explanation lands like doubt. A clean, "I don't know, but here's what I do to find out," lands like authority. You're not saying you're incompetent. You're saying you're honest enough to separate what you know from what you don't. That boundary is rare. Most people blur it constantly, overstepping into guesswork, overdressing their hunches in authority clothes, hoping nobody notices the seams. When you refuse to do that, you become the person others actually listen to, the person they believe, the person they ask when it matters. This works because it does the opposite of what ego demands. It claims territory by being willing to stand in the empty space without flinching. Confidence, real confidence, has nothing to prove. Try it in your next meeting when you don't have an answer ready. Notice how the room changes. Notice who leans in closer. Notice which conversations actually deepen after you say it. That's the sound of someone taking you seriously. Own the mistake immediately. There's a moment in every mistake where you can feel the temperature shift in a room. Someone notices, most people panic and either hide, defend, or blame. You're about to do something different. The second you realize you got it wrong, say it first. Say it faster than anyone else can point it out. Not as an apology that shrinks you, but as a fact. That number was wrong. Let me correct it. Or, I misread the email. Here's what I actually meant. No elaborate backstory, no excuses dressed up as explanations, just the mistake, naked and owned. What happens is almost electric. People's guard drops. They stop waiting for you to slip further or watch you scramble. Instead, they see someone who doesn't need the room to protect them from reality, and that kind of person gets trusted faster than anyone who pretends to be flawless. Your credibility actually goes up when you're the one who catches yourself, because it signals you're paying attention and you don't need to waste energy on a cover story. The trick is timing. Own it immediately before someone else has to do it for you. That split second of truth-telling rewires how people see your competence. They think, okay, this person knows what they're doing well enough to spot when they're not. It's counterintuitive. The thing that feels most dangerous, admitting you're wrong, becomes your strongest move in the room. The respect that follows isn't pity or relief, it's genuine. Try it next time. In a meeting or a conversation that matters, watch how quickly people start leaning in instead of leaning back, and how honesty becomes the thing they remember about you. Never narrate your nerves. You walk into a room for a presentation and feel your throat tighten. Your instinct is to say it out loud. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Most people do this thinking it buys them grace, and it does, just not the kind you want. The moment you announce your anxiety, you've handed your audience permission to see you as uncertain. They weren't looking for signs of weakness until you pointed them out. What you've actually done is transferred your internal state into the room's shared reality, and now everyone is watching for you to fall apart. It becomes a self-fulfilling script. Your body feels the nervousness. Your mouth narrates it. Your audience leans in to confirm it. And then you're stuck performing the very thing you advertised. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Your nerves are information only you have access to. Nobody can feel your heartbeat or your dry mouth unless you tell them. You can speak with a shaky voice and say nothing about it. Your audience will focus on your words, not your biology. You can pause to think without narrating anxiety as the reason. You can reset between thoughts without explanation. Anxiety thrives on an audience. Silence starves it. The people who seem effortlessly composed aren't always calmer. They're just not narrating the process. They let their body do its thing backstage while their voice stays clean and purposeful. Next time nerves hit, try this. Notice it privately, breathe, and say the next true thing you meant to say anyway. Your competence doesn't need a disclaimer, and your silence is far louder than any apology. Refuse to laugh nervously. You know that moment when someone says something mildly awkward and you feel the laugh bubbling up in your throat? That little nervous giggle that feels like it'll explode if you don't release it? That's the exact moment your credibility starts to slip. Nervous laughter is a tell. It says you're uncomfortable, unsure, maybe even afraid of how the other person will react. It's your nervous system screaming out loud while you're trying to look composed. Here's what happens when you let it rip. People unconsciously downgrade how seriously they take you, not because you laughed, laughter is fine, even good, but because that specific flavor broadcasts anxiety. It's the audio version of fidgeting. Worst part? It travels backward. When you laugh nervously at something uncomfortable, the other person feels your discomfort and mirrors it. Suddenly, the whole room is off balance. The trick is brutal in its simplicity. When you feel that nervous laugh coming, swallow it. Pause. Breathe through your nose. Let maybe a half second of silence sit instead. If you need to respond, nod or give a small, controlled smile, something intentional, not reactive. Your face doesn't have to be stone. Just make sure whatever expression lives there belongs to you, not to your fight or flight response. When you stay steady through discomfort, people assume you've handled worse. They treat you like someone who can hold ground. That invisible shift in how they perceive your competence travels forward into every conversation you have with them, and it starts the moment you refuse to crack. Withhold the eager smile. Watch what happens when someone walks into a room already grinning. We read it as relief, as seeking permission, as trying too hard to be liked, not as confidence. The eager smile signals that you need something from them, their approval, their comfort, their reassurance. That tiny signal drops you down the hierarchy before you even speak. A genuinely confident person does not broadcast happiness before they know what the room holds. They arrive neutral. They read the space, then they choose their expression. When you meet someone with a level gaze and a pause before the smile, something shifts in their nervous system. You seem like you have already decided whether they are worth the warmth. You seem like you are choosing them, not auditioning for them. Try it in your next conversation. Hold the smile for the first 2 or 3 seconds. Let your face be calm, almost assessing. Then, when you smile, it lands differently. It feels like a gift rather than a plea. People lean in. They take you more seriously because you do not appear to need them to. The smile stops being a nervous habit and becomes an actual choice, a signal that you are present and evaluating, not performing. Notice how their energy shifts when they realize you are not here to earn their approval. That fractional pause in your expression is nearly invisible to them, but their gut catches it immediately. You have just moved from seeking to granting. The whole game lives in that single moment of restraint. Skip the flattery opener. You walk into a room and immediately tell someone how smart they look, how impressive their work is, how rare their talent seems. Pause. Watch their eyes. You're not seeing trust settle in. You're seeing them brace. Their shoulders tighten. Their voice gets careful. What you meant as an investment just became a debt they now have to manage, and they're already calculating whether you want something or whether this compliment will eventually come with a bill attached. Flattery reads like a pitch, even when it isn't one. The brain treats it like a salesman's opening move. People who are actually serious don't lead with praise. They lead with specificity. Instead of, "You're so talented," try, "I noticed you solved that client problem by reframing the scope instead of throwing more people at it." That's not flattery. That's observation. That says you've been paying attention to what they actually do, not just performing admiration to soften them up. The shift is tiny but neurologically massive. Specificity signals respect. It signals you see them as complex, not as a mark to butter up. It says you're not here to negotiate. You're here to collaborate. Real credibility doesn't whisper sweet nothings. It shows up with evidence that you've listened, that you've noticed, that you take the other person seriously enough to bring something concrete to the table. Next time you're tempted to open with praise, stop yourself first. Ask instead, what did they actually do that mattered? Then lead with that. Watch how differently they meet you when you show up with precision instead of performance. Skip the throat clear opener. Watch what happens in that tiny moment right before someone speaks in a meeting. The small cough, the so anyway, the apologetic laugh. People lean back slightly. Their listening gets softer. Your brain just sent a signal that says, this person is warming up, not starting, and suddenly you sound less like someone with something to say and more like someone who's still figuring out what they think. It takes maybe 2 seconds, but you've already lost ground. The fix sounds almost too simple. Start, not with a throat clear, not with a hedge, not with a self-deprecating joke or a quick thing, just the first real sentence. Here's what happened instead of, so, I was thinking, the difference is massive because it rewires how people perceive your confidence before they even know what you're saying. A direct opening makes the listener's nervous system settle. It says, I know where I'm going. This works because your voice is a map of your certainty. Hesitation sounds like you're still asking permission to speak. Clarity sounds like you already have it. When you skip the verbal warm-up, you're not being rude. You're being respectful of the other person's time and attention. They feel it as directness, not coldness. People take seriously those who treat the conversation itself as already begun, not something that needs an apology before it starts. Start with substance. Your next meeting, try it. No preamble, no apology, no setup. Begin. Then notice what shifts. Name the elephant first. You walk into a meeting. Everyone's staring at their laps. The budget is blown. The deadlines move twice, and nobody wants to say it out loud. The tension sits there like a physical thing. Then someone, usually not the boss, just says it. Look, we all know we're over budget and behind. And suddenly, everyone exhales. The elephant gets smaller the moment you name it. Most people think credibility comes from pretending problems don't exist or hiding them until they're forced out. Wrong. The opposite happens. When you name the awkward thing, the contradiction, the gap between what everyone's thinking and what's being said, you stop looking like you're hiding. You look like you're in control. You look like someone who can see clearly and isn't afraid. People take you seriously because you're not performing. You're not spinning. You're not waiting for someone else to break the ice and risk being the negative one. You did it first, which means you're not threatened by reality. If the deadline is impossible, say it. If the plan has a hole in it, point it out. If the person across the table is uncomfortable, acknowledge it. The psychological flip is sharp. Vulnerability about facts reads as strength. Denial reads as weakness. And the people who name the elephant first get listened to because they've already proven they can see what's real and aren't performing for anyone else's comfort. The key is tone. Don't deliver it with doom or self-pity, just clean, unflinching clarity. This is the constraint we're working with. Here's what that means. That move, that one sentence, shifts how people perceive your competence forever. Name the unspoken objection. You're pitching an idea and the room goes quiet. Not a hard no, just silence, a slight lean back. Someone's eyes shift. That's not agreement. That's doubt hanging in the air, unspoken. Most people panic and keep talking, filling the void with more reasons why they're right. That's the trap. The person across from you isn't silent because they lack information. They're silent because something feels off and they don't want to say it out loud. So name it. I'm sensing some hesitation. Is it the timeline that feels tight, or are you wondering if this actually fits what you need right now? Suddenly, the room shifts. You've just given permission to be honest. You've moved from performer to listener, and that's when people actually start taking you seriously. The magic isn't in forcing agreement. It's in acknowledging the real thing nobody's saying. When you name the unspoken objection, you prove you're paying attention to what matters, not just selling. You're also neutralizing the elephant. It's no longer something they have to hide behind politeness. It becomes discussable, solvable, real. And in that realness, trust forms. You've essentially said, I see you. I'm not going to pretend this is easier than it is. Let's talk about the actual thing, that vulnerability, That willingness to sit with discomfort instead of glossing over it, that's what separates people who get taken seriously from people who just get tolerated. It's a small move with outsized weight. The next time you feel that hesitation creeping in, pause. Name it directly. Watch what happens. This shift alone turns you from another voice selling into a person actually worth listening to. Name the emotion in the room. Walk into a meeting where everyone's smiling, but nobody's talking. The air feels tight. Most people pretend they don't notice. They push forward with the agenda like nothing's off. You notice differently. You pause and say, I'm sensing some hesitation here. Or, there's something we're not saying out loud. Watch what happens next. People relax. Their shoulders drop. Suddenly they can breathe. You just gave permission for the real conversation to start. And they'll remember that you're the kind of person who sees what's actually happening instead of what's supposed to be happening. Naming the emotional temperature in a room is a small move with enormous gravity because most of us are trained to ignore it. We pretend the tension isn't there. We polka around it. We pretend professionalism means stuffing feelings into a box and continuing the PowerPoint. But tension doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just gets louder, slower, more contagious. When you name it with clarity and zero judgment, not therapy speak, just plain observation, you signal that you are not afraid of what people actually feel. That's rare enough to be striking. It also gives other people permission to stop performing. They get to be real, and people take seriously the person who lets them be real. The trick isn't becoming a therapist. It's noticing when the room's emotional weather has shifted and saying it out loud without flinching. That small truth-telling rewires how people see you instantly. You become the person who sees the whole picture, the spoken and the silent. And that's magnetic. It's how you move from bystander to trusted voice. Name the pattern aloud. Watch what happens in a meeting when someone keeps interrupting, then agrees with themselves, then moves forward, and everyone just sits with it. You could speak up and get steamrolled, or you could do something sharper. Say the pattern out loud, calmly, without judgment. I've noticed we've started this 3 times and circled back each time. Should we finish one thought first? The room shifts. You're not just another voice. You're the person who sees what's happening. Naming a pattern does something magnetic to how people perceive you. It signals you're not trapped in the moment like everyone else is. You're observing from a step back. You're holding the map. People unconsciously respect observers more than participants because observation requires a kind of quiet confidence. You have to be secure enough to step outside the current flow and comment on it. The trap is naming patterns with edge, with frustration bleeding into your tone. That kills the whole thing. You have to sound curious about the pattern, not annoyed by it. I'm seeing something here and I'm wondering about it lands completely different than why do you always do this? When you name a pattern neutrally, you're not attacking anyone. You're just making the invisible visible, turning what nobody will say into what everyone suddenly sees. And the moment someone realizes you're watching what they don't or what they're not admitting, something shifts in how they listen. They start wondering what else you're noticing about them, the room, the situation they're all swimming in together. Ask what changed. Watch someone's shoulders drop when you walk in. Their voice flattens. Your instinct kicks in. You fill the silence with reassurance. Redirect the conversation back to yourself. Ask if you messed up somehow. That's the trap, and almost everyone falls into it. Here's what actually works. Ask what changed in their world, not what changed in how they're treating you. Did something land at work? Did a conversation go sideways? Did a plan collapse? Most people are starving for someone to notice the actual event instead of managing the emotional weather around it. When you ask what happened, you signal something rare. You see them as someone with a full life, not as someone whose job is to manage your feelings. You're not fishing for reassurance. You're not performing care. You're naming the invisible thing like someone who already knows that people aren't moody for no reason. They're responding to real events happening outside the room. And here's where it sticks. They will tell you, not immediately, maybe, but the door opens because you asked about the actual news, not the feeling. You stopped treating them like a puzzle to solve and started treating them like someone with information worth hearing. The shift is small, but the effect is electric. In a world where most people are desperate to manage how others feel about them, the person who asks what actually happened becomes the one everyone leans toward. You become the one who sees clearly instead of performing concern. Seriousness doesn't come from intensity or pity. It comes from attention to what's real. Ask why now someone walks into your office with an urgent ask, budget approval, a decision, a favor, and they need it today. Your instinct is to either say yes quickly or push back defensively. But there's a third move that makes you sound like someone who actually thinks, pause, and ask why the timeline is what it is. Not interrogating, not skeptical, just genuinely curious about what's driving the urgency. When you do this, three things happen at once. First, you signal that you're not just reactive. You're thinking through the real structure of the problem, not just the surface request. Second, you often discover the actual constraint. Maybe it's a client deadline, maybe it's a meeting slot closing, maybe it's something totally invented for pressure. Most people haven't examined their own timeline. They inherited it or assumed it without pushing back themselves. And third, you buy real time to actually think without looking slow or indecisive. Someone who asks why now sounds like they have authority, because authority is what asks questions instead of scrambling for answers. This works in negotiations, in meetings, in relationships, anywhere someone's trying to compress your decision-making and narrow your options. The quiet magic is that it sounds like you're taking them seriously, when really you're taking the situation seriously. You're not doubting them, you're deepening the conversation. People feel the difference and lean in because they sense you're actually present. When you finally do say yes or no, it lands harder because they know you meant it, that you chose it deliberately. The timeline question becomes the quietest way to stay in control while making everyone feel genuinely heard. Ask the uncomfortable question. You're in a meeting and someone pitches an idea that doesn't quite land. Everyone nods politely. Nobody says anything. Then you ask, what happens if this fails? Suddenly the room shifts. People lean in. You're no longer a passenger. You're someone willing to say what everyone was thinking but pretending wasn't there. Most people spend their social energy smoothing things over, keeping conversations light, staying safe. But the uncomfortable question is what separates people who actually get heard from people who get shuffled aside. It's not about being rude or contrarian. It's about asking the thing that matters but feels risky to voice. The real question hiding underneath the polite one. How do you know that's true? What's the worst case? Are we avoiding something here? These aren't aggressive. They're curious, grounded, specific. When you ask what others won't, you signal three things at once. You're confident enough not to need approval. You respect people enough to engage with their actual idea instead of just the surface shine, and you care about real answers over fake harmony. People gravitate toward that energy because you're not playing the same game everyone else is playing. The trick isn't weaponized disagreement. It's being the one brave enough to ask for clarity when the rest of the room is nodding in the dark. The payoff comes quietly. You become the person people remember, the one they actually listen to, not because you're loudest, but because you're willing to go where others won't. Start small, one honest question per conversation. Watch how differently people respond when you're the one willing to name what's actually on the table. Ask the clarifying question. Watch what happens the next time someone vents to you. Your instinct is to fix it, prove you understand, or jump straight to advice. That's when you lose the room. The person who stops, tilts their head slightly, and says, "Wait." When you say they dismissed you, do you mean they didn't respond at all, or they responded but didn't take your suggestion? Suddenly sounds like someone who actually listens. It's magnetic. Most people assume they know what you mean. They nod along, and 5 minutes later, you realize they were picturing something completely different. You were never heard. The clarifying question does something invisible, but huge. It signals that your words matter enough to deserve precision. It also hands control back to the speaker. You're not reframing their problem or steering the narrative. You're inviting them deeper into their own story. That shift alone changes how seriously they take you. Here's what's happening underneath. When someone feels truly understood, not parroted back, but genuinely clarified, their nervous system registers safety. That's not an accident. Trust builds in those moments, and trust is the bedrock of being taken seriously. The trick isn't complicated. Ask one thing at a time. Resist the urge to ask 5 follow-ups in one breath. Let them answer fully. Sit with their answer. Then ask the next one. People who do this sound like therapists, journalists, detectives, people who extract truth because they refuse to assume. That refusal to assume, that willingness to actually check before you proceed, is exactly what makes them unforgettable in a room full of people who barely hear each other at all. Ask for the decision maker. Walk into a room, pitch your idea, and watch the nod. They take notes, they smile. Then comes the phrase that kills momentum. "I'll run this by my team." What you just heard was no, but softly. That person sitting across from you cannot say yes. They can only say no, and they usually will, because ideas die in translation the moment they leave the room. The person who agrees with you is not the person who signs the check. The person who signs the check barely heard your pitch. They heard a watered-down version filtered through someone else's hesitation, someone else's doubts, someone else's need to look good to their own boss. So before you sit down, before you even open your laptop, ask one clean question. Who is actually making this decision? Not rude, not aggressive, just clear. Sometimes the person in front of you laughs and says, "That's me." Sometimes they pause and admit they are not. That pause is gold. You just saved yourself weeks of chasing ghosts and rewriting decks for people with no power. If they are not the decision maker, ask if the actual decision maker can join the call or reschedule. It feels weird for maybe 5 seconds. Then it feels like respect. Executives recognize this move instantly because it signals you are not performing, not wasting their time, not playing office politics. You are being direct about what matters. That directness tells the room you take yourself seriously, and the room always follows someone who does. Ask for time explicitly. Most people crumble the moment someone rushes them. Your boss leans against your desk. Your partner asks a heavy question. Your client stares while you fumble for an answer. The instinct is to fill the silence, to prove you're quick and competent, to say something, anything, before they lose patience. But here's what actually happens. Rushed answers are weak answers, and weak answers kill credibility faster than honesty ever will. So instead, try this small move that sounds almost radical in its simplicity. Just ask for the time you need. Not defensively, not apologetically, just straight. I want to give you a real answer on this, not a half thought. Can I come back to you tomorrow? Or let me think about that for a second, while you actually do. People respect that more than you'd expect because it signals something rare, someone who cares more about being right than being fast. The psychology here is clean. When you ask explicitly for time, you're not dodging the question. You're showing it matters enough to answer well. And the person asking, they suddenly see you as someone who thinks, not someone who reacts. They see restraint as strength. They see the pause as seriousness. The real trap most of us fall into is treating silence and delay as weaknesses we need to hide from view. But the people you actually admire, the ones who feel genuinely solid and trustworthy, they're the ones comfortable enough to say, I don't know yet, but I will. That's not hesitation. That's not weakness. That's authority wrapped in honesty. Ask them to commit out loud. You know that hollow feeling when someone nods yes, but you can taste the asterisk behind it, agreement that lived only in their head and evaporates the moment they look away. What flips that is making the commitment audible. When you ask someone to voice their agreement out loud, their brain treats it like physics, not politics. Psychologists call it the consistency principle, but the real move is simpler. Once words leave your mouth, you own them in a way that feels almost bodily. Your manager might silently agree to give you autonomy, but the moment you lock eyes and say, so just to confirm, you're saying I can make these calls without running them by you first? And they hear themselves say yes again, something hardens. The act of speaking it out loud, even in a private two-person room, creates social weight. People genuinely dislike contradicting what they've literally spoken into existence. It's not manipulation, it's clarity made audible. When something matters, get them to name it precisely. You're committing to that deadline next Friday? Lands entirely different from cool, we're good, right? The gap sounds tiny, but it shifts how seriously they hold the thing. Their voice becomes the evidence. They can't pretend later they misunderstood or that things were fuzzy. What you're really doing is making them a witness to their own promise, and witnesses are much harder to ignore. The unbothered follow-up question. Someone finishes their point. There's a pause. You could nod and move on, or you could do what people who command rooms actually do. Sit in that silence for a breath and ask the one question that shows you weren't just waiting for your turn to talk. The unbothered follow-up question is the antidote to people who mistake listening for weakness because it signals you're genuinely processing, not performing. Here's the trick. After someone shares an opinion, a story, or a decision, don't jump to agreement or pushback. Instead, ask something small that reveals you were actually tracking the deeper thread. What made you feel that way about it? Or, what would that look like in practice? Or even just, tell me more about that part. The magic isn't in the words, it's in the timing and the ease. You're not interrogating. You're not trying to catch them. You're just curious enough to dig one layer deeper, and the curiosity reads as confidence. Most people stop listening the moment they get their opening. You keep listening. You follow the thread. You ask the question they didn't expect, delivered like you're genuinely interested in the answer, not like you're building a case against them. That shift changes how people perceive your intelligence and intent. They feel heard, which is rare enough that they'll remember you as someone who actually pays attention. The real payoff, that one follow-up question, often uncovers the thing they were trying to say but hadn't quite found words for yet. And suddenly, you're not just having a conversation. You're having the conversation that matters. Let them finish completely. Most people interrupt because they think they already know where the sentence is going. Your brain feels the shape of their thought and wants to complete it, to show you're tracking, that you're quick, that you belong. It feels like engagement. It actually reads like you didn't hear them. There's a specific exhaustion that comes when someone cuts you off mid-breath, even if they guess right. Your nervous system registers, not safe to finish here, not safe, and the person who interrupted has just signaled that their prediction of you matters more than your actual words. When you let someone speak all the way to the natural end, through the pauses, through the meandering parts, through the silence that makes you want to fill the space, something shifts in the room. They feel met, not corrected or completed or impressed, but actually encountered, actually seen. This is partly why therapists get paid so much to do so little. They sit there, they let the silence exist, they let you find your own ending. When you mirror that restraint in conversation, you become the person people trust with real things. You're not building credibility through speed or cleverness or wit. You're building it through the simple discipline of waiting. The people who interrupt constantly never understand why others share their depth with someone else. Next time you feel that itch to jump in, pause. Let their last thought land first. Count to 2 in the silence. That small practice is what separates people who are merely heard from people who are actually remembered, the ones others seek out when it matters most. Interrupt the interrupter calmly. Someone cuts you off mid-sentence in a meeting, and your nervous system floods with that hot, fast feeling. Speed up, raise your voice, snap back. But what if you did the opposite instead? Hold your hand up gently, keep your tone exactly level, and say something like, "I'm going to finish this thought in 10 seconds, then I'd love to hear what you're saying." Then stop talking, sit with the silence. What just shifted is the entire social contract in that room. You didn't match their energy, which means you didn't validate the interruption as acceptable behavior, but you also didn't create conflict or go defensive. You simply reset the boundary without any aggression attached. Here's what most people don't realize. People who interrupt are usually anxious or feel unheard, so they grab the conversational floor like it's disappearing. When you stay calm and surgically clear, you signal something specific. You're not a pushover, but you're also not fragile enough to shatter over rudeness. That combination is rare and magnetic. The person who interrupted will either respect you more in that precise moment, or they'll get quiet because they got caught doing something low status. Either outcome works in your favor. You've just taught everyone in that room something fundamental about how to be around you, that you take yourself seriously enough not to rush, not to perform drama back at them, and not to let someone else's anxiety hijack your airtime. Your calmness isn't weakness. It's a form of leverage that makes every word you say afterward land heavier and slower, like it actually matters. The controlled interruption recovery. Someone cuts you off mid-sentence and your nervous system lights up. Fight or freeze. That's the automatic script. Most people either shut down entirely or muscle back into the conversation, and both moves telegraph panic. Here's what actually lands instead. Pause for exactly 1 beat, then turn toward them with genuine curiosity, as if they've just said something worth your full attention. "Go ahead," you say, and mean it with your whole body. Then, when your turn comes back around, don't resume from where you were interrupted. Acknowledge their point first, even if just to say, "I hear you on that," before pivoting back to your original thought with fresh energy and renewed momentum. This tiny choreography does something almost alchemical to how people perceive you. It signals that you're secure enough to be interrupted without defensiveness, confident enough to let others speak without resentment, and thoughtful enough to actually track what they said instead of just waiting for your moment. You're not scrambling to reclaim dominance, you're collaborating. The interruption doesn't diminish you because you don't treat it like an attack on your credibility. People take you seriously partly because you take them seriously in real time, not just when you need something from them. It's the difference between someone who fights for airtime and someone who doesn't need to. Resistance reads as weakness. Permission reads as strength. Next time you get cut off, resist the instinct to power through. The pause, the permission, the acknowledgement, that's where actual authority lives. Refuse to compete for airtime. You know that feeling when someone's talking over you and you lean in, raise your voice, speed up to be heard? You just lost. The moment you fight for the microphone, you've signaled that what you're about to say matters more to you than it matters to them, which makes it sound desperate. People who get taken seriously don't compete. They speak as if they've already been invited. There's a specific gravity to silence. When you finish a thought, you stop. You don't fill the gap with nervous filler. You don't repeat yourself hoping they'll catch on. You wait. That pause is magnetic because it's rare. Everyone else is drowning in their own urgency. So when someone speaks and then actually stops, the brain treats it differently. It sounds authoritative. It sounds like someone who isn't performing for approval. The practical move: notice when you're about to interrupt or talk faster or lean in. That's your signal to do the opposite. Let them finish. Let the space breathe. When it's your turn, speak at your normal pace. Say what you came to say, then close your mouth. If they don't respond, that's not your problem. That's theirs. Here's the thing that trips most people up. We're taught that being heard requires volume and persistence, that silence means you've lost the room. But gravitas isn't about decibels or forcing your way in. It's about someone who refuses to chase you, who just states what's true and waits for you to catch up. That person gets taken seriously. The person fighting for air never does. Quiet confidence always wins. Speak last in the meeting. Poker players study timing for a reason. Early words get swallowed by the next voice before the air settles, forgotten under fresh noise. The last thing people heard is what shapes the room's memory like a final brushstroke. In a meeting, whoever speaks last looks like they had the most complete thought. You don't need volume, just patience. Let others spill ideas, contradict each other, circle half-formed questions while you watch the room like a map, noticing what landed, what fell flat, where energy shifted, what got dismissed too quickly. By the time it's your turn, you've got the full picture. You can acknowledge what worked, build on it, sidestep dead ends, connect dots no one else saw. You sound like you've thought further ahead because you have. The real catch is discipline, the instinct to jump in early, to stake your claim, to prove you belong. That's loud and real, and it feels like belonging. But silence is a tool that makes people hungry for what you're about to say. When you finally speak, they lean in, phones down, listening harder because you've built expectation through restraint. You've also given yourself cover. Fewer people remember exact words from the opening, but they'll quote your closing comment back to you for weeks. Power isn't always volume. Sometimes it's about knowing when the room is actually ready to receive you. Set the agenda first. Walk into a room where someone else has already framed what you're going to talk about, and you're playing defense the entire time. They've planted the stakes, the language, the outcome they want, and suddenly you're reacting instead of leading. This is why the person who speaks first owns the conversation. When you set the agenda, you don't just control the topic, you control how seriously people take what comes next. Your frame becomes their frame. If you say, I want to talk about 3 things that'll save us time and money. People lean in differently than if you just show up and react to their questions. They're expecting structure. They're expecting you've thought ahead. You've already signaled competence just by going first. The trick is simple. In emails, meetings, calls, proposals, you name the game before anyone else does. Here's what I'm seeing. These are the 3 decisions we need to make. I've got 2 options to run by you. Notice you're not asking permission to steer, you're steering. And people respect that because it feels authoritative without being aggressive. They don't feel manipulated, they feel heard because you've done the thinking for both of you. Even in casual conversation, the person who names the stakes early, "This is actually important to me," or "I need your honest take on this," gets taken seriously. You've signaled that what comes next matters. The moment you define the landscape, people stop scrambling to orient themselves and start following your lead instead. That's not manipulation, that's the architecture of influence, and it begins the second you speak first. State what happens next. You're in a meeting, someone floats a vague proposal, "We should probably do something about the budget." And most people just nod and move on. But watch what the people who get taken seriously do. They stay quiet for a beat, then ask, "So what happens next?" Or they narrate it outright. This means we pull the numbers by Friday, present them to Finance Monday. Suddenly, you're not just listening, you're thinking 3 moves ahead, and that's magnetic. People assume you know something they don't. When you describe the next sequence of events aloud, you're doing 3 things at once. You're proving you've actually thought past this moment. Most people haven't even begun. You're handing everyone else a script to follow, which feels like relief in a room full of fog, and you're quietly claiming yourself the architect of what comes next, which is genuine authority without bluster. This works because humans crave certainty and direction. When you dissolve the fog about what's coming, you become irreplaceable. The real magic is in specificity, though. Don't say, "We'll follow up soon." Say, "I'll send the draft Tuesday at 5 p.m. so you have Wednesday morning to review, then we reconvene Thursday." That precision feels like a handshake with certainty itself. It signals you're not just speaking, you're already 3 steps into execution. Next time someone throws out a vague idea, try it. Narrate what happens next in concrete, time-specific language. Watch the room recalibrate around you. You've stopped being a voice and become the person steering the ship. Name the deadline yourself. That moment in a negotiation when someone asks, "When do you need this?" and you freeze, that's where most people hand over the entire frame without realizing it. The person naming the deadline controls how serious the work feels, what buffer actually exists, and whether you read as someone with a plan or someone in crisis mode. Let them set the timeline, and you've just told the room you don't know what you're doing yet. The real move is deceptively simple. You name it first, not aggressively, not as a question, but matter-of-factly. "I can have the first draft to you by Thursday the 14th, or let's reconvene with a decision 2 weeks from now." Something specific that lands like you've already thought 3 moves ahead. What happens next is almost invisible but unmissable. They start operating inside your timeline instead of theirs. Your deadline becomes the anchor point, and because it's yours, it feels deliberate, not panicked. People take you more seriously when you move like you already know what comes next. You're also building in breathing room for yourself without saying so. If they push back asking for something faster, you had buffer built in. If they agree, you keep it. Either way, you're the one who decided what realistic actually means. That's quiet power that shows up everywhere. Job interviews, creative pitches, asking for favors, setting expectations with your team. The person holding the timeline isn't the nervous one. They're the one who looks like they're already running the show. Reframe the request as standard. Ask someone for something unusual and watch them lean back, calculating risk. Ask the same thing but frame it as routine, and their whole body relaxes. You're not changing what you want. You're changing the mental category it lands in. When you say, "This is how we usually handle it," you're not lying. You're giving their brain permission to treat your ask as normal operating procedure instead of a favor. A designer friend needed feedback on work that was clearly still rough. Instead of, "Would you mind looking at this mess?" she said, "I need your eye on the latest version, same as always. Same messy draft, different frame. I watched the person's resistance evaporate. They shifted from doing her a solid to doing their job." The trick works because people are lazy processors. Your brain wants to file things into existing categories. This is how this type of request goes, rather than invent new ones. When you sound like you're stating procedure instead of asking for an exception, you bypass the part of them that says no. It's especially lethal in work contexts. "Can you squeeze this in?" lands different than "this needs to go in the Friday slot." One sounds like asking for mercy. The other sounds like informing them of reality. The key is tone and specificity. You need to sound like someone stating a standard, not someone hoping. No apology creeping in. No, "if you don't mind." Flat, clear, matter of fact. You're not manipulating. You're just refusing to frame your legitimate need as unusual. People take seriously what sounds inevitable, the pre-commitment frame. You walk into a negotiation and casually drop one sentence before anything gets serious. "I'm someone who always follows through on what I say." Notice what just happened. You didn't ask for agreement. You planted a flag about who you are. That flag is a pre-commitment, and it works because humans hate the feeling of being hypocritical, especially inside their own heads. Your brain gets nervous about contradicting an image you've already claimed publicly. You become serious not because you're louder or more aggressive, but because you've made it psychologically expensive to back down. The person across from you feels this shift instantly, senses you're not bluffing because you've locked yourself in. You can use this anywhere. Tell a client, "I only take on projects I believe will work." Then watch how much harder you'll push to make it succeed. Tell a colleague, "I'm the kind of person who admits when I'm wrong." And suddenly, you have permission to ask tough questions without sounding defensive. The trick is specificity. Vague claims like, "I'm honest," bounce right off people's radar. But "I don't make promises I can't keep," or "I'll tell you straight," even if it's not what you want to hear, creates real friction between your stated identity and any future contradiction. People notice the coherence immediately. They feel the seriousness in someone who's already decided who they are before the pressure even starts. When you pre-commit this way, you're not asking others to believe in you. You're making yourself believe harder first, and they sense that commitment the moment you speak it aloud. Establish the shared metric. You're in a meeting and someone says your project is behind schedule. Immediately, your stomach tightens. But behind according to what? Their deadline or yours? Days or dollars? A vague claim hits different than a number you both agree on, and that agreement, that shared metric, is the single move that stops arguments before they start and makes you look like the person who actually knows what's happening. Here's where you shift the entire room. When someone vague walks in, you get specific first. Instead of nodding along to, "We need better results," you say, "What does better look like? Are we talking response time, error rate, or user retention?" You've just done 3 things at once. You showed you think in systems, not feelings. You forced them to commit to a real answer instead of hiding behind vibes. And you made yourself impossible to dismiss later because everything you say is now measured against a number you both named. People take you seriously when you're the one holding the ruler because they know you will measure them against what they actually said, not what they meant or hoped you'd forget. A boss won't brush off your request if you frame it against the metric she already agreed to. A client can't claim you missed the mark if you both signed off on what the mark actually was. The move is simple. Write it down, propose it, get their buy-in, then move forward like you're keeping score because you absolutely are. That number becomes your shield and your proof. Restate the stakes plainly. Most conversations die because nobody actually said what matters. You're negotiating a project deadline, and the other person keeps talking around the real problem: budget, time, ego, fear of failure. They feel it. You feel it. But the moment someone names it out loud, the room shifts. It's not fancy rhetoric or clever framing. It's the difference between dancing around something and putting it on the table where both of you can see it. When you strip away the polite layers and say, look, if we don't nail this by Friday, the client walks and that tanks the quarter, you sound like someone who's already thought 3 moves ahead. You sound like you've got skin in the game. Most people spend energy hiding what they're actually worried about, which makes them sound uncertain, reactive, negotiating in the fog. But you're naming the real cost. That clarity is magnetic. It tells people you're not there to score points or waste their time. The trick is specificity, not this is important, but if we don't solve this, your team's credibility with the board takes a hit, and that affects your next raise conversation. You don't have to be cold about it, just direct. When the stakes are crystal clear and you've said them without apologizing, people lean in. They stop hedging. They take you seriously because you've given them permission to treat this like what it actually is, something that matters. Speak about second-order effects. Most people stop thinking one move ahead. You say something in a meeting, you get a reaction, and you think the chain is done. But the room is still watching to see what else unravels. When you think 3 or 4 steps forward and mention it casually. If we cut costs here, suppliers get nervous, and next quarter we lose flexibility. Suddenly, you sound like you're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. You're not just describing a problem, you're describing a web of consequences. Second-order effects are the invisible dominoes most leaders never name. Your competitor drops prices, so you match them, so margins shrink, so you hire slower, so good people go elsewhere, so your culture thins, so retention plummets. See the chain? Most people react to the first thing and wonder why the second thing blindsided them. The trick is deceptively simple. When you're making an argument, especially to someone senior or skeptical, weave in what happens after the obvious thing, not as speculation or hedging, but as calm observation. We could automate this, but then we'd lose the institutional knowledge those people carry, and we'd be rebuilt from scratch next year. You're not saying no. You're thinking out loud like someone who's seen how these stories end before. People trust that lens. Expertise isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about seeing 2 moves ahead when the room is still looking at 1. That clarity, that layered thinking is what separates the voice people lean in to listen to from the voice they nod at and forget the moment you stop talking. The confident restatement loop. Someone challenges your idea in a meeting and your nervous system lights up. The instinct hits hard. Defend, explain louder, stack more evidence on top. That almost always backfires. What actually works is something much quieter, almost counterintuitive. You restate your position once more, but slower, calmer, without apology or hedging. Not because they didn't hear you the first time, because repetition from a calm source reads as conviction, and your nervous system state is doing the real talking in that room. When you get questioned, most people immediately shift into justification mode, which signals uncertainty even if your facts are solid. The confident restatement loop breaks that pattern. You listen to the challenge, you pause for 2 breaths, and you say your core claim again, almost unchanged, but with the tone of someone who already knows it's true and is simply reminding them. No "I think" qualifiers, no maybe language, no apologetic backpedaling, just the idea, cleanly restated. What makes this work is that repetition from someone genuinely unshaken reads as strength, not stubbornness. It also gives your brain time to get past the adrenaline spike of being questioned. You're not arguing, you're anchoring. People take you seriously not when you have the best argument, but when you seem certain enough that your certainty becomes contagious, when your calm becomes the room's new baseline. The next time someone pushes back, try it. Restate once more, calmly, like you're reminding them of something they already half knew, and watch how the energy shifts. Use their exact words. You're in a meeting and someone says they feel unheard. Most people nod and pivot to solutions, but you lean in and mirror it back. So you feel unheard right now? Watch what happens. Their face softens. Their defenses drop. They believe you actually listened because you proved it. Not with sympathy, but with precision. When you use someone's exact phrasing, you're not just repeating. You're showing them you didn't run their words through your filter. You caught what they said, not what you thought they meant. This matters because most conversations are full of drift. They say frustrated, you hear angry. They say, I need space, you hear they don't care. But when you bounce back their specific language, you break that drift instantly. It signals respect at a neurological level. They feel seen, and people take seriously those who actually see them. The second layer is deeper. Using their words in a response makes you sound less like an outsider and more like someone who belongs in their world. If they say, this process is clunky, don't call it inefficient. Stay clunky. If they describe something as draining, don't upgrade it to exhausting. Keep it real to them. This is not mimicry, it's precision. And precision sounds credible because it requires attention. Careless people generalize. Serious people match the map. Next time someone shares something that matters, pause before you answer. Fish for their exact phrase and hand it back to them first. 3 words. That's all it takes to shift from sound like everyone else to sound like the one person who actually got it. Repeat their name once. You're in a coffee shop and someone introduces themselves, Sarah, let's say. Most people nod and forget it, or worse, pretend they didn't quite catch it. But what if the next time you speak, you said it back? Not creepy or repetitive, just once, naturally woven in. Sarah, I actually had the same experience last year. Something shifts. People feel seen when you use their name in conversation, not because of magic, but because you've proven you were listening hard enough to remember. It matters that their identity registered with you. In a world where everyone half listens while planning what to say next, actually holding someone's name in your head feels like respect. The neuroscience backs it up. Hearing your own name activates the brain's attention centers, makes you feel more present and valued. Here's where the real leverage lives. When you use someone's name once during a conversation, you signal you're not running through a script or treating them like a transaction. You're treating them like someone worth the mental effort to remember. It anchors them to you differently, shifts how they perceive you. They'll think of you as someone who listens, which means when you eventually ask for something or push back on an idea, they'll take it seriously because they already know you're not just talking to hear yourself talk. The trick is restraint. Use it once, maybe twice max in a whole conversation. Overdo it, and you flip from genuine to salesman mode, and they'll feel it. One clean, casual use of their name is the difference between sounding like you actually care and sounding like you're working a technique on them. Mirror their tempo downward. Someone walks in hot, words tumbling, energy scattered, every sentence racing like it's fleeing something. You feel the pull to match it, to speed up and prove you're keeping pace. Don't. Watch instead how someone with real weight in a room moves differently. They pause. They let silence live between sentences. The gap feels chosen, not afraid. When anxiety or urgency floods a conversation, the person who slows down becomes the gravitational center, not because they're louder, but because they're not competing for air. Here's what actually happens. The fast talker begins to match you. Their breathing settles. They listen harder because you've given them permission to stop rushing. Tempo is a language your nervous system speaks faster than your conscious mind. Fast talking reads as uncertainty, even desperation. Slowness reads as knowing something they don't, which reads as power. In conflict or negotiation especially, this shift is almost eerie to watch. Someone arrives demanding, aggressive, loud. You lower your voice a half notch and add a beat before you answer. Suddenly, they feel the absurdity of their own speed. They anchor to your tempo because rhythm signals certainty, and certainty signals who actually belongs in control. You're not manipulating. You're reframing the room's entire emotional weather. You're giving people permission to be less frantic, to trust that the important thing will wait for them. The nervous system hunts for rhythm, and people unconsciously gravitate toward anyone who makes them feel like they can finally breathe again, like the conversation isn't a race they're losing. That's the real trick. You're not slowing them down. You're just refusing to speed up. Drop volume, raise weight. Think about the person you find most authoritative in a room. Chances are they're not the loudest. They're the one who makes you lean in, the one whose quiet command pulls your full attention without effort. Most people do the exact opposite. They crank the volume when they want to land something important, as if decibels somehow equal truth. What actually happens is the noise floods the room, and your credibility floods out with it. When you lower your voice, you force people to pay closer attention. They have to stop scrolling, stop side-talking, stop pretending they're listening. Suddenly you have their neurons, not just their ears. But here's the real physics. Speaking quietly doesn't mean speaking weakly. Weight comes from precision, from choosing words like you're placing stones, from letting silence live between thoughts instead of filling it with nervous filler. A whispered, "I need to tell you something," hits harder than a shouted declaration ever will, because your brain knows the difference between volume and importance. It's just learned the wrong association somewhere along the way. This week, watch yourself in conversation. Notice when you speed up or get louder because you're anxious about being ignored or forgotten. Try the opposite move instead. Slow down. Drop to a tone that requires genuine attention. Let the other person work slightly harder to hear you. You'll feel vulnerable at first, like you're disappearing into the background. You're not disappearing. You're consolidating. You're moving from noise to signal, from filler to substance. That's exactly when people actually listen. Lower your speaking pitch. Your vocal cords vibrate faster when you're nervous, which is why anxiety pitches you up. Gravity and authority live in the lower frequencies. Notice how a parent's voice drops when they're about to say something that matters, not louder, but lower. When you speak from your chest instead of your throat, You sound like someone who has already decided something is true. That simple shift in resonance rewires how people perceive your confidence before you've even said anything substantial. The trap is forcing it. If you strain to go lower, you'll sound like you're performing, and people smell performance like dogs smell fear. Instead, take a breath that reaches your belly. Speak a little slower. Let the words ride on more air, and your pitch will naturally drop because you're not rushing to fill silence. This matters most when stakes are high. The job interview, the difficult conversation, the room full of skeptics. Women often feel pressure to do the opposite, to climb in pitch, to seem friendly. But research shows lower-voiced women are perceived as more competent and trustworthy, not less likable. That's not permission to sound false. It's permission to stop apologizing with your voice. The person who sounds settled wins before the debate begins. The next time you're about to say something, you want someone to really hear, feel for that lower register, and notice what happens. You might be surprised how much of your authority was hiding there the whole time, just waiting for you to breathe. Use the professional register. There's a reason board members don't say "like totally" in meetings, and it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's about bandwidth. When you speak casually, your listener's brain has to sort through casual cues. Am I being challenged? Is this a joke? Are we friends or working? The professional register does the opposite. It tells their nervous system, this is serious work, and I respect the stakes. You don't need to sound stiff or fake. Professional register just means precision over filler, complete thoughts over fragments, and steady pace instead of vocal fry and upspeak. Notice the difference. Yeah, so basically the numbers are kind of concerning versus the quarterly numbers show a significant decline in customer retention. Same person, same data, one sounds like thinking out loud. The other sounds like someone who has already thought it through. Your listener's brain trusts the second one more because it signals preparation and respect for their time. This isn't about class or vocabulary. It's about showing you've done the work before speaking. Drop the ums, kill the upward inflection at the end of statements, and use complete names instead of pronouns in important moments. Not he did it, but Marcus completed the project early. It sounds more authoritative because you've removed the assumption that they already know who you're talking about. You're holding the narrative, taking up the room without apology. Try it in your next meeting. Notice how many people actually lean in when you switch out of chat mode. They're not responding to snobbery. They're responding to your signal that something matters enough for you to speak with care. The composed disagreement phrase. Most people in a heated moment go for speed. They interrupt, they defend, they match the other person's energy like it's a duet nobody asked for. What separates someone people listen to from someone they dismiss is a single small shift, the composed disagreement phrase. When someone pushes back, instead of pushing back harder, you say something like, I hear why you see it that way. I landed somewhere different, and here's what I'm seeing. Notice what you didn't do. You didn't ignore them. You didn't say they're wrong. You didn't get smaller. You acknowledged the realness of their view while claiming your own ground. The phrase works because it signals control in real time. In that moment, you are the one breathing steady. You are the one choosing your words with intention. The other person is still in the heat, still reactive, still searching for the next argument. Neurologically, that registers as authority. People take seriously the person who stays linear and clear when the room gets hot, and they dismiss the person who matches the chaos. The trick isn't to be nice or to agree, it's to stay composed while everyone else is reacting on instinct. Your steadiness becomes contagious. It pulls the temperature down without you having to say a thing about it. Try this the next time someone contradicts you or pushes you. Don't dodge, don't escalate, just acknowledge and own your position in one smooth breath. You'll notice the conversation shift, and suddenly you're the one they're actually listening to instead of just waiting to speak again. Deny the emotional bait. Someone says something designed to provoke you, a dig at your competence, a crack about your choices, a subtle implication that you're not enough. Your body feels it first. The heat, the urge to defend, the pull to match their tone and go lower. That's the bait, and the moment you bite, you've already lost control of the room. Serious people don't scramble to prove themselves. They don't react on someone else's schedule. They stay still. Here's what actually happens when you refuse to take the bait. The other person expects escalation and gets silence instead. That absence of reaction is so rare, it actually unsettles them. Your refusal to dance makes you look unmoved, unafraid, secure. It signals you don't need their validation enough to fight for it. You can acknowledge what they said without feeding their fire. A quiet nod, a brief "I hear you," then a topic shift. Or say nothing at all and move on to your point. The person who stays composed while others are trying to rattle them becomes the person others listen to. Not because you won one argument, but because you refused to play the game they set up. Emotional maturity reads as power in the room, and people respond to that language faster than words. So next time you feel that pull to react, pause hard. That tiny gap between stimulus and response is where your credibility lives. Stay in it. Let them feel their own discomfort instead. That's when people start taking you seriously, when they realize you're not available for their emotional games and never were. Decline the premature agreement. Someone pitches an idea and you nod before your brain catches up. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. You feel quick. You feel aligned. You feel like a good listener. But here's the trap. You just signaled that you're not actually listening at all. Premature agreement is the reflex of someone who performs agreeability instead of thinking. Serious people don't do that. They pause. They turn the idea over like it's a hot coal, looking for the weak points, the assumptions underneath, the shape of what might actually work. When you rush to validate, you announce that you're not the kind of person who weighs things carefully. You become agreeable furniture, and agreeable furniture gets moved around without consultation. The real move is quieter. When someone throws out an idea, resist the reflexive yes. Ask something real instead, not to be difficult, to be genuinely curious. What happens if that falls apart? Or how did you land on that specific angle? This does two things at once. It buys you actual thinking time instead of forcing you into performance mode. And it signals that you're someone who investigates before endorsing, someone whose agreement actually means something because it didn't come for free. People listen harder to people who listen harder. The premature agreeers become yes machines. The ones who pause, who ask, who let silence breathe a little. Those are the ones others sit up for. Next time an idea lands in front of you, try waiting 3 full seconds before you answer. That small friction, that willingness to sit in the question longer than expected, is where your credibility actually lives. Decline to be rushed. There's a moment in nearly every conversation when someone pushes for an answer you're not ready to give. A boss wants your decision now. A date wants to know how you feel. A salesperson needs a yes before you leave the room. Most people cave. They rush their words, their thinking, their commitment. And the person pushing suddenly has all the power. Here's the reversal. Slowness reads as certainty. When you pause, when you say, "Let me think about that," or "I'll get back to you," something shifts in how others perceive you. They stop seeing someone who bends to pressure and start seeing someone with standards, with an inner life that matters more than their urgency. Rushing yourself signals that you don't trust your own judgment. Taking time signals that you do. The trick is not stubbornness, it's genuine deliberation. You are not refusing to decide, you are deciding well. A 5-second pause before you speak, a day before you commit, a conversation with yourself before you say yes to something that doesn't sit right. People who get taken seriously are not faster, they are harder to move. They don't perform thinking, they actually think. And when they finally do speak or agree, their words land differently because everyone knows they were earned, not extracted. Next time you feel the squeeze, notice it. Feel the little panic underneath it. Then do the opposite of what it wants. Breathe, wait. Let them feel the weight of your silence. That's not coldness. That's respect for yourself, which teaches them to respect you too. Refuse the rushed handshake. You're in a meeting. Someone extends their hand with that quick, eager flick of the wrist, the kind of handshake that's already half over before it starts. Most people grab it fast, squeeze, release. You're going to do something different. You're going to slow it down. When their hand reaches yours, grip it firmly and hold it for a full second longer than feels normal. Not creepy, not a vice, just present. What happens next is subtle but reliable. They'll feel like they made contact with someone who exists, not a node in a network, not someone checking boxes, a person. The rushed handshake is a tell. It says whoever's offering it is already mentally elsewhere, moving to the next person, the next thing, the next version of themselves they're trying to sell. When you refuse that tempo and hold the grip steady, you signal something rare in a distracted room. You showed up. You're not performing, you're actually there. People read that in the body before the brain catches up. That 1-second difference in pressure doesn't just feel different to them, it rewires the power dynamic. Suddenly, you're not the person trying to impress. You're the person who made them feel heard, not through words, through the fact that you didn't rush past them. Watch what happens next. They'll give you more attention. They'll remember you. They'll treat you differently in the room, not because you were loud or clever, but because you were still. Presence itself is a kind of authority that no amount of talking can fake, and it starts with the smallest refusal to move at their speed. Move slower than expected. Watch what happens next time you're in a meeting and someone raises their voice or speeds up. Most people mirror that energy, panic sets in, and suddenly everyone's reactive instead of thinking. Now flip it. Slow your speech down by maybe 20%. Pause between sentences like "the silence belongs there," and move your hand to gesture deliberately instead of flicking it around like you're swatting flies. That tiny friction you create, that "wait, why is this person not rushing like I am?" makes your brain look like it knows something they don't. Slowness reads as control. It reads as certainty. A surgeon doesn't sprint to the operating table. A judge doesn't blurt rulings. Speed is the vocabulary of anxiety and urgency. Slowness is the dialect of someone who already decided the outcome. You don't have to be loud or dominant. You just have to refuse to match the tempo of the room's panic. When you sit with your shoulders back and let 3 full seconds pass before answering a question, something shifts in how people perceive your authority. It's not performance. It's about honoring the weight of what you're saying with the space it deserves. Most people are so desperate to fill silence that they talk their credibility straight into the ground. You won't. That restraint, that permission you're giving yourself to take up time instead of apologize for it, is what separates the people others listen to from the people others tolerate. It's the difference between sounding like you're defending yourself and sounding like you've already won. The measured walking pace. Walk into any room and you'll spot the difference instantly. Someone moving like their nervous system is firing in 5 directions at once, feet quick and scattered, versus another person in the same stakes moving like time is working for them, not against. Slower, deliberate, almost grounded. People lean toward the second one before a word is spoken, and that pull has almost nothing to do with language. Your pace is a signal your nervous system broadcasts before you even introduce yourself. Speed reads as anxiety. Steadiness reads as authority. A measured walk, not stiff, not theatrical, just unhurried, does something to the people watching you. It tells them you are not rushed by their presence, not threatened, not hunting for permission. That's what makes people sit up straighter and listen harder. You can test this yourself next time you enter a meeting or space where you want to land well. Slow your stride by about 15% from what feels natural. Don't drag it. Just let your feet hit the ground like each step is chosen, intentional. Watch what happens to the room's attention. Heads lift, eyes track you. The noise doesn't shift, but the texture of focus does, tightens, settles on you. It's neurology, not performance. When someone moves with that kind of certainty, the nervous systems of people around them register a single signal. This person is calm enough to be trusted. That one behavioral shift, one foot in front of the other at a rhythm that says, I am here and I am not asking permission, will change how seriously people listen before you ever open your mouth. The unhurried entrance. You've probably noticed how the person who rushes into a room feels smaller somehow, even if they're tall. Their energy says, I'm late, I'm anxious, I need this more than you do. Now watch the person who takes 5 extra seconds to cross a threshold. They pause at the door, step in with their chin level, settle their weight like they belong there. Nobody told them to do that, but everyone in the room shifts without knowing why. Your nervous system picks up on it first, before your conscious mind catches the story. When you enter a space too quickly, you signal that you're governed by external pressure. Your body broadcasts that others control the pace. Slow it down, and you flip that entirely. You become the one who decides when to arrive, where to stand, how long to pause. It's not about being creepy or theatrical. It's about removing the jitter that screams, I need approval. Here's what's happening underneath. Your brain doesn't separate eagerness from desperation, and speed reads as need, while stillness reads as certainty. People trust people who aren't scrambling. So the next time you walk into a meeting, a party, or a conversation you care about, add 3 seconds to your arrival. Don't shuffle. Don't apologize with your gait. Let your body arrive first, then let your presence catch up to it. Your voice will drop a register. Your words will land like they came from somewhere solid. You won't have to earn credibility. You'll have already claimed it before your mouth opened. That's not arrogance. That's physics. The quiet entrance is a small reset. You're telling your own nervous system that you're not desperate and everyone else is listening. The unhurried document review. Watch what happens when you hand someone a proposal and they flip through it in 8 seconds flat. Their brain does not actually land on anything. It's scanning for reasons to say no, hunting for escape routes. The moment you appear rushed or eager, they inherit that pressure, and pressure makes people defensive. But slow down. When you read something aloud to a room, pausing at key passages, letting silence sit for a beat after numbers or claims, something shifts in how they absorb it. They cannot skip ahead. They cannot skim. You control the tempo, and tempo is authority. This works in one-on-ones too. Hand them a document, then actually watch them read it, not with impatience, but with genuine interest. Take a sip of water. Let them turn the page at their own speed. People read faster when they feel watched, so the gift you give them is permission to slow down. And when someone slows down, they actually think. They see details they would have missed. That detail, a line item, a specific number, a turn of phrase, becomes the thing they remember and repeat. The unhurried review also signals you are not desperate. Desperate people rush. Serious people have time. You demonstrate that you believe in what you are showing them so much that you are willing to sit in the discomfort of silence while they consider it. That belief is contagious. By the time they finish reading, they have already convinced themselves because you gave them space to do it without your voice in their ear selling. The deliberate note-taking pause. Watch what happens the next time someone pitches you an idea or makes a request. Instead of answering right away, open your phone or grab a pen, pause, and write down what they said, not frantically, slowly, with intention. That simple act flips the power dynamic so hard that most people don't even notice it's happening. You're not just listening, you're documenting. You're treating their words as if they matter enough to capture, which instantly signals that you take both them and the moment seriously. Most people rush to respond because they think it proves they were paying attention. Wrong move. The people who make others feel truly heard are the ones who show that what was said deserved a beat of silence, a physical record, a moment of wait. When you put pen to paper, your nervous system actually slows down too. You become calmer, more deliberate, harder to rattle. The person talking feels it. They shift from pitching or complaining into actually thinking more clearly because someone is treating their words like evidence instead of noise. And here's the real trick. That pause gives you time to think before you speak, which is where actual authority lives. Nobody respects the person who fires back instantly. They respect the one who considers, the one who lets a sentence land before responding. You don't need to write much. A date, a few words, a name, even a single line is enough. The gesture itself is the message. It says, "You registered. I'm taking notes. This moment has weight." That's how you become the person others take seriously. The high-status stillness. Watch a crowded room long enough, and you'll notice the person who stops fidgeting gets the air, not frozen or awkward, just genuinely still. No phone checking, no collar adjusting, no leg bouncing under the table. Most people read that quiet calm as confidence, and confidence feels like authority. You've probably felt it yourself, sitting across from someone completely at ease while you're nervous. That gap is real. The stillness makes them seem like they have nowhere to be, nothing to prove, and all the time in the world for what matters. Fidgeting, by contrast, is honest. It broadcasts anxiety straight to the reptile brain. Your hands move, your eyes dart, your weight shifts, and people unconsciously decode that as uncertainty. Even if you're actually certain about everything, your body is telling a different story. Here's the practical bit. You don't need to be still all the time, just in the moments that count. During a difficult conversation, after you make a point, before you answer a hard question, that's when stillness lands hardest. Let the silence sit. Let your body rest. Don't fill the gap with nervous movement or filler words. The person across from you will feel the difference between someone who is rattled and someone who is settled, and their brain will decide which one deserves respect. This isn't manipulation, it's neurology. Movement means flux, instability, unfinished business. Stillness means grounded, resourced, in control. Choose it deliberately in those high-stakes moments and watch how the room's energy shifts. People give attention to whoever seems like they don't need it. Hands visible and still. Your nervous system knows what hidden hands mean before your conscious mind does. Watch the next person who talks to you while their hands are buried in their pockets or tucked under a table. You'll feel a small friction, a guardedness. Even if they're being completely honest, your brain reads disappearing hands as evasion. I have nothing to hide. I'm not about to make a sudden move becomes I'm concealing something. Now flip it. Place your hands where they can be seen, on the table, resting on your lap, anywhere in the open, and keep them still, not fidgeting, not gesticulating wildly, just present and steady. The stillness is as important as the visibility. Fidgeting reads as anxiety or concealment. Wild hand movements read as overcompensation or desperation, but visible, calm hands broadcast control, confidence, and trustworthiness in a language your listener's brain understands before conscious thought even arrives. This is why courtroom lawyers are trained on it. Why hostage negotiators deploy it, why the most credible people in any room tend to have their palms visible during entire conversations. Hands are broadcasting constantly whether you notice or not. They're either saying, I'm solid and transparent, or I'm nervous and hiding. The trick sits at the edge of comedy in its simplicity. Let people see them, keep them still, and watch how the friction dissolves. That single shift in positioning does more credibility work than 100 polished words ever could. People take you seriously when your body language stops whispering doubt. Claim your physical space. Walk into any conference room and notice the person whose laptop, phone, and papers have already claimed half the table. They've communicated power without opening their mouth. Space is the first language your body speaks, and it lands before words do. The person who takes up room, not aggressively but unapologetically, gets read as someone worth taking seriously. Watch confident people. They sit back in chairs instead of perching on edges, keep elbows on armrests, don't shrink when someone enters their zone. None of this is rudeness. It's the absence of apology for existing. Here's the hidden loop. When you physically claim space, your nervous system gets the signal that you belong there. Your brain starts to feel more grounded, more entitled to your own voice. It works both ways. Your body tells others you matter, then your mind believes it too. Humans still read dominance and authority through proximity and posture the same way our ancestors sorted hierarchies millennia ago. You don't need to sprawl or invade someone else's territory. Just stop collapsing inward, keep shoulders back, leave space between yourself and the wall. When you sit, actually sit instead of hovering. In meetings, claim your seat fully. When interrupted, don't flinch backward. These microclaims of space compound invisibly over time. People unconsciously register you as more present, more settled, more like someone whose words carry weight and deserve attention. Tomorrow, start noticing how you currently move through a room, the edges you hug, the way you fold yourself smaller. Then shift it, one small gesture at a time. The shift is quiet, but people feel it immediately, and that feeling becomes the first impression you never have to explain. Sit before being invited. Walk into a meeting where everyone's standing, the air still electric, people deciding if it's time to settle. Then you sit, not with hesitation, not after looking around. Just sit. What you've just done is claim territory, and your nervous system knows the difference between standing and sitting better than your conscious mind does. Standing keeps you ready to flee. Sitting says you're staying, and that signal travels through the room faster than words. People unconsciously interpret it as confidence, ownership, belonging. When you sit first, you shift from guest to occupant. Your posture grounds your voice. Your eye line becomes steadier. And here's what's sneaky. The person who sits controls the spatial story. You're not asking permission to be there. You're demonstrating it. In negotiations, interviews, informal group settings, this small move changes how people physically orient toward you. They adjust their stance, their tone drops slightly, their defensiveness softens. They're not thinking, why did they sit? They're feeling, this person belongs here. The trick works because sitting is a declaration without words. It's harder to argue with a body position than with a statement. Just watch the shift happen in real time. Someone will hesitate before speaking to you. Someone will nod more slowly, more thoughtfully. Their shoulders will relax slightly, and the person who was running the room will glance at you differently, not threatened, just recalibrating. Sit before you're told you can. Let them adjust to your presence instead of the other way around. That small friction between their expectation and your action is where your authority gets built. Sit at the table's head, walk into a conference room, and watch where people naturally gravitate, almost never the head of the table. There's a reason. That seat carries weight before you say a single word. Your body is telling the room something your mouth hasn't had to confirm yet. When you choose the head, you're declaring you have something to say worth listening to, and you're organized enough to structure the conversation. People sense that immediately. Most of us have been trained to sit wherever feels humble or safe, the middle of the long side, where we can observe without committing. But that reads as hesitation to anyone paying attention. The head of the table is a statement of intent. Here's the nuance. This works only if you earned the seat through role, context, or genuine preparation. If you're a peer sitting there without invitation, you'll look desperate and the room will smell it like smoke. But if you've called a meeting, if you're facilitating, if you have something concrete to walk through, that seat becomes your podium. People unconsciously treat you differently. They ask questions differently, they nod longer, they remember what you said with sharper detail. It's spatial psychology working at the level below thought. Your position shapes how your words land before they even enter the room's ears. Don't drift to the edge when your input matters. Sit where the geometry supports your message. Speak to the room center. Watch what happens the next time you're in a meeting or crowded space. Most people's eyes lock onto a single face, the loudest voice, or whoever nodded first. Your nervous system treats that one person like a spotlight. But here's what actually separates people who feel dismissible from people who command the room. They speak to the whole space, which means speaking slightly past everyone toward the physical middle of the room itself. It sounds like a tiny adjustment. It rewires everything. When you address the center instead of hunting for friendly faces, something shifts in how your body holds itself. Your shoulders stay open. Your chest stays visible. You're not leaning toward approval, you're broadcasting. People at the edges feel included instead of overlooked. People in the middle feel addressed directly. The room stops being a jury you're pleading to and becomes an audience you're genuinely sharing air with. Politicians and seasoned speakers do this almost by reflex because they learned long ago that the moment you single out one face, everyone else unconsciously becomes background noise. Your credibility tanks because you've just signaled that some people matter more than others in the room, a message the body reads before the brain even notices. Speak to the physical center. Let your gaze drift naturally across it, and the room settles into you differently. You'll feel the shift first in your own chest, that tiny unlock that happens when you realize you're not performing for permission anymore. You're simply present, and presence is what makes people lean in. Try it once and watch how the silence changes. Keep the chin level. Watch someone ask permission and their chin dips. Watch someone deliver a verdict and their head tilts up. Your chin is a silent telegraph broadcasting whether you actually believe what you're saying. Angle down even slightly, and your listeners' mirror neurons fire in sync. They unconsciously feel smaller, less certain, like they're watching someone who isn't entirely convinced of their own authority. Tilt up and you look defensive, almost arrogant, which shuts people down in a different way. The center point, chin level with the horizon, signals something rarer. You're not performing certainty or doubt. You're just present. This is why negotiators, therapists, and people who actually move others tend to keep their postural line steady. It's not about looking tough. It's about looking settled. When your head stays neutral, your words get louder without your voice getting louder. People lean in. They trust the message more because your body isn't undermining it with a flinch or a reach. Try this in your next conversation that matters. A pitch, a difficult talk, even a casual ask. Feel the difference between dropping your chin mid-sentence versus holding the line. You'll notice people respond differently. They sit straighter, they listen longer, they stop interpreting your body language as a question mark hanging over everything you just said. That steady horizon line becomes an anchor point, something in their peripheral awareness that says, this person isn't wavering, and neither should I. Your chin level is one of those invisible tells that silently communicates genuine conviction without a single word spoken. The deliberate posture reset. Sit in any meeting for 10 minutes and watch your body disappear. Shoulders creep towards your ears, spine rounds, chin drifts forward. You haven't been told you're taking up too much space, but your nervous system got the memo anyway and is already apologizing for existing. Then you catch it, that small moment of awareness, and you reset, shoulders back and down, spine tall but not rigid, feet planted, chin level. 3 seconds, no words. Your nervous system registers the shift from defensive to grounded before your conscious mind finishes labeling it, and the person across from you feels it too, even if they can't point to what changed. Research on postural feedback shows that your body doesn't just express confidence, it manufactures it. When you sit like you belong in the room, your brain releases cortisol in the right places and your thoughts sharpen. Your baseline of seriousness rises without you saying a word. Slouching reads as hesitation. Hunching reads as apology. But a deliberate, upright posture reads as someone who has already considered what they're about to say and stands by it. The trick is not to perform it or lock it down like a soldier. It's to notice when you've collapsed inward and gently reset without announcing the repair. Most people won't see the mechanics. They'll only feel the difference in you, more anchored, more certain, more real. And because your body is now certain, The certainty bleeds into your voice, your choices, your presence. That small shift in your shoulders doesn't just change how you look, it changes the whole room's permission structure around you. The reset is a tiny invisible lever that moves surprisingly heavy weight. Slow blink under pressure. You're in a tense conversation, maybe a negotiation, maybe a confrontation, and the other person just said something designed to rattle you. Your instinct is to react fast, to prove them wrong, to defend. But here's what separates people who get taken seriously from those who don't. They pause. They slow down their blink. It sounds absurd, but your face is always broadcasting whether you're in control or spinning. A rapid blink cycle signals anxiety, reactivity, scrambling. A deliberate, slow blink, the kind where your eyes close for a full second, then open again with intention, reads as calm certainty. It's the physical equivalent of saying, "I heard you and I'm not threatened." When you blink slowly under pressure, you're not performing for the room. You're actually buying your own nervous system time to downshift. Your breathing naturally deepens. Your face stays composed. The person across from you registers this as strength, even if they can't name why. A slow blink is also contagious. It subtly pulls the other person's nervous system toward matching yours. The trick is this. The next time someone tries to provoke you or push you into a quick answer, close your eyes for a beat longer than normal. Don't make it theatrical. Just let the blink happen at half speed. Open them while you think. You'll feel the shift in your own body first, and that grounds you before you speak. People who feel grounded speak with weight. They get believed. They get taken seriously. The unblinking follow-through. You say you're going to send someone that document by Friday. Thursday rolls around. You're busy, distracted, tired. You think, I'll send it Monday. They won't notice. They notice. Not because they're obsessive, but because your broken promise landed in a pile of broken promises they've been collecting about you, and the weight shifted something in how they see you. Credibility doesn't live in your words. It lives in the gap between what you said and what you actually did. People take you seriously when that gap stops existing. This isn't about being perfect. It's about treating small commitments like they matter because to the person waiting, they genuinely do. Send that text you promised. Make the call on the day you said you would. Show up 5 minutes early, not because you're anxious, but because you're reliable. The weird part is how magnetic this becomes. When someone knows you mean what you say, even about tiny things, they start believing you about big things too. Their nervous system relaxes around you. They stop fact-checking your words in real time. But here's the catch. You can't fake this. You can't perform follow-through selectively. Your brain is too busy, your attention too scattered, your good intentions too flaky to sustain a double life. So you have to actually do it. Choose fewer commitments and honor them like they're contracts written in blood. That unblinking consistency, finishing what you started, keeping the small promises, showing up the way you said you would, is rarer now than actual competence. It's your quiet superpower, the one that rewires how people see you before you ever open your mouth. Break eye contact sideways. Watch what happens the next time someone pitches you something and you look straight down. They feel it as rejection, like you've stepped back from the conversation. Now picture the same moment, but you shift your gaze sideways, just a hair, while your face and body stay locked on them. That micro movement is a tell-all for thinking. Your attention hasn't abandoned them. You're just accessing a different part of your mind, and they know it. Most people break contact downward, which signals shame or discomfort, the kind of body language that whispers small. But sideways? That's the glance of someone considering, weighing, staying engaged, but not yet convinced. And somehow that feels more honest than nodding along. Actors and politicians live in this space. That sideways look while your chin stays level says, I'm processing this carefully, not I'm uncomfortable and hiding. The brain reads it as confidence because genuinely confident people don't feel the compulsion to drop their eyes into their lap like they've done something wrong. They hold themselves steady and let their gaze drift while they think, then recalibrate back to you. It creates a rhythm that staring dead ahead, which gets unsettling fast, or looking down completely can never match. In professional settings, this small choreography gets you read as thoughtful instead of timid, analytical instead of anxious. People take you more seriously because you're visibly working through their words rather than just receiving them passively. That tiny shift in where your eyes land is the difference between seeming like you're genuinely thinking and seeming like you're uncomfortable or disconnected. The single raised eyebrow. You've seen it in every spy film, every political debate, every moment someone wants to communicate doubt without saying a word. One eyebrow lifts, the entire room shifts. It's such a small muscle movement that it barely registers as effort, yet it does something remarkable. It broadcasts skepticism, mild surprise, or gentle authority in a way that words often botch. The single raised eyebrow works because it's nonverbal subtext. Your listener's brain catches it before their conscious mind does, and they read it as a sign that you're evaluating what they just said. You're not angry, you're not dismissing them outright, you're just pausing, questioning. The eyebrow creates a tiny pressure valve in conversation. A visual cue that says, I'm listening, but I'm also thinking. This matters because most people who ramble or oversell their ideas are blind to their own tells. They don't know when they've lost credibility, but a single raised eyebrow gives them that information instantly. They feel the shift. They second-guess themselves. They adjust. The trick is subtlety. This isn't a dramatic arch or a furrowed scowl. It's a half-second lift held just long enough to register, then released. Practice it in a mirror until it feels natural, not performative. When someone makes a claim you want to test, or when they're stretching the truth, lift one eyebrow and stay quiet. Watch what happens next. 9 times out of 10, they'll fill the silence themselves, either backing down or over-explaining into a corner. That quiet muscle twitch isn't manipulation. It's just letting their own nervous system do the work for you. The steady, low-frequency nod. Watch someone you actually respect during a serious conversation, not the nervous bobber, not the enthusiastic headshaker, but the person who nods maybe once every 5 or 6 seconds, slow and deliberate. That rhythm does something. It signals you are processing what they say, not just waiting for your turn. Your brain reads it as authority, as someone who takes the moment seriously enough to think through it. Most people nod too fast or too often, turning it into a verbal tick that actually undermines their credibility. You become the person who is too eager to agree, too hungry for connection. The steady, low-frequency nod is different. It sits in the space of consideration. A therapist does this. A trial lawyer does this. Someone evaluating your proposal does this. The magic is in the constraint. You are forcing yourself to actually absorb what is being said instead of just performing attentiveness. And the person speaking feels it. They sense you are not just polite. You are genuinely weighing their words. This works even better when you pair it with brief silence after they finish, maybe half a second of quiet before you respond. That pause plus the measured nod together create a reality of serious deliberation. If you are nervous or unsure, your instinct is to move more, to fill the air with gesture and motion. The opposite is true. Slow it down. One nod per 5 seconds. Let the quiet do the work. People will assume you know more than you do, and over time, that assumption hardens into actual respect. The credibility you signal becomes the credibility you earn. The steady exhale reset. You know that moment when someone walks into a room and you can feel their nervous energy before they even speak? Their breath is shallow, their shoulders are tight, their voice comes out higher or faster than it should. People don't trust what they can't predict, and an anxious nervous system reads as unreliable, even if you're not saying anything wrong. Here's what actually works. Before you step into any moment where you need gravitas, a meeting, a difficult conversation, a pitch, take 3 deliberate exhales, each one longer than the last. Not yoga class exhales with mystical intention, just mechanically longer breaths where the out-breath lasts twice as long as the in-breath. Your vagus nerve registers that slowness and tells your entire system you're safe. Your body drops its alert posture. Your voice finds its lower register naturally. Your face softens. And people feel that shift instantly without knowing why they believe you more. They just do. The exhale works because it's the only part of your nervous system you can control directly. You can't will your heart rate down, but you absolutely can stretch your breath. A 45-second reset before you walk in, before you sit down, before you speak, is genuinely enough to rewire how others perceive you in real time. People take seriously the person who looks like they've already arrived, who isn't still in transit mentally, who moves through space as though they have permission to be there. The steady exhale is your arrival ticket, and it costs nothing but intention and 30 seconds of your time. Correct the wrong title. There's a moment in every meeting where someone misspeaks or gets a detail backwards, and the room holds its breath. Do you let it slide, or do you jump in? Most people freeze because correction feels risky, like you're being a pedant, or worse, making someone look stupid in front of others. But here's what actually happens when you correct someone skillfully. You gain authority without arrogance. The trick isn't correcting loudly or making a show of it. It's correcting what they said, not who they are. I think you meant the Q3 numbers, not Q2. Those actually showed a dip lands completely differently than no, you're wrong. One is collaborative, one is combative. People who take you seriously are the ones who gently steer the ship without making the captain feel seasick. When you catch an error, whether it's a mispronounced name, a reversed fact, or a confused detail, do it quietly, quickly, and as if you're both solving a small puzzle together. Don't let a false claim sit and calcify. Don't make the correction feel like a trap. The sweetest part? When you correct things accurately and without ego, people start to trust your information more broadly. They see you as someone who cares about precision without cruelty. The room notices too. They watch how you handle the mistake, and they unconsciously sort you into a category. Someone reliable, someone who won't humiliate them if they slip up. That's the person others listen to, follow, and take seriously. Not because you're harsh, but because you're reliable and you make it safe to be wrong. Withhold the unnecessary detail. Watch someone tell a story and you'll see it instantly. The ones people actually listen to don't fill silence with noise. They say what matters and stop. Someone else? They walk you through their morning coffee, every tangent, the 3 reasons they're late, and by the time the actual point arrives, you've mentally left the room. That nervous over-explanation reads as uncertainty, like they don't trust their own words enough without padding. Here's the strange part. Strip away decorative details and the core message lands harder. A lawyer doesn't tell the jury her coffee was cold before presenting crucial evidence. A surgeon doesn't explain every thought that led to the diagnosis. They trust the listener enough to keep the essential thing sufficient. The difference between a detail that illuminates and one that just buys time becomes feelable the more you practice it. If someone doesn't need it to understand or believe you, it's unnecessary. That's not coldness, it's being surgical with words. When you speak with that restraint, people actually lean in instead of away, sensing you're not afraid of what you said and not desperate for approval through volume. The next time you reach for that third reason, or the extra context, or the qualifier, pause. Let what you already said sit in the air. Let them sit with it. Watch how differently people respond when you trust them enough to listen without the rescue rope. Show constraints, not availability. Luxury brands never advertise stock levels. The moment something feels infinite, your brain flags it as disposable. But here, I can only take 3 new clients this quarter, and your nervous system wakes up. Scarcity triggers seriousness. People respect what's hard to get. Think about the last time someone said, "I'm too busy to meet," versus "I'm available Tuesday at 2 us." Which one felt more valuable? The second person sounds obligated and interchangeable. The first person sounds like someone worth rearranging for. This isn't manipulation, it's honesty deployed strategically. Real constraints live in your life right now. You do have limits on time, energy, clients, projects you'll take on. Most people bury these limits because they fear losing opportunities. But here's the reversal. Naming the constraint actually makes you more magnetic. When you say no to certain things, you implicitly say yes to quality. When you mention a deadline or a limit, you signal that your time has weight. Someone who says, "I'm finishing up a project, so I can only give this 2 hours this week," sounds more professional than someone offering unlimited availability. You're not creating artificial scarcity, you're being transparent about real boundaries. The magic lives in the announcement. Tell people what you're not doing, what you're not taking on, when you're not available. Let them feel the edge of your constraints. That texture, that boundary, is where they lean in. They will respect you more for the wall than for the open door. The constraint itself becomes your credential. The costly signal detail. There's a reason luxury brands put their logo on nothing, while knockoffs plaster it everywhere. The real thing doesn't need to announce itself. This is costly signaling, and it works backwards from what most people assume. When you drop a detail that costs you something, your time, your comfort, your ego, people believe you're not performing. You're just being. A surgeon who wears cheap shoes to the hospital. A CEO who answers their own email at midnight. Someone who knows a thing so deeply they don't need applause for knowing it. Your brain picks up on this instantly because costly signals are genuinely hard to fake. If you're pretending, you'll slip somewhere, too polished, too eager to be noticed, too consistent with the story you're selling. Real credibility lives in the small sacrifices you don't mention, the detail that costs you but helps them, staying late on a call because they needed it, not because you wanted credit. Admitting you don't know something instead of bullshitting your way through. Wearing the old jacket because it's comfortable, not performing minimalism. These moments land harder than any achievement you could name because they signal you're invested in the actual work, not the narrative about yourself. People take you seriously when they sense you have nothing to prove. nothing to perform, nothing to defend. So stop managing your image and be willing to look foolish in service of being real. That detail nobody asks for, the one that costs you something quiet, that's what sticks with them. That's what makes them trust you when it matters. Choose the harder truth. Watch what happens when someone admits the awkward detail first. They say, I messed up the timeline on that, or I don't actually know, and here's why I thought I did, or that makes me look unprepared, but it's true. Something shifts in the room. Your nervous system recognizes you are not being managed. You are being trusted with the actual picture. Most people sound unreliable because they optimize for comfort in the moment. They soften edges, tell you what you want to hear, leave out the part that makes them look bad. Then reality shows up later and proves they were wrong or hiding something, and you stop trusting them. But the inverse is equally true. Confessing a small flaw builds massive credibility, and not the rehearsed kind. I mean the uncomfortable specificity that costs them something to say. I was defensive about that because my last project failed lands different than I was just tired. One is convenient. One is real. People take you seriously when you seem honest enough to risk being wrong. When you choose the harder truth instead of the smoother one, you signal something primal. I care more about reality than image. That is magnetic. It makes people lean in because they know you are not performing. The micro skill is catching yourself mid-sentence, feeling the pull toward the easy version and choosing the one that costs you credibility points in the short term but buys them in the long. Made quietly and repeatedly, that single choice separates people who sound confident from people who sound trustworthy. The quiet competence display. Watch someone walk into a room and answer a question in 30 words when they could have taken 100, and you'll see the shift. People lean in, ask for more, treat them differently. Meanwhile, the person who talked for 2 minutes straight is forgotten by the elevator doors. Quiet competence doesn't announce itself. It shows up, does the thing, and stops before the story gets tired. You mention you've dealt with this before, maybe solved it, and then you ask them what they're seeing instead of explaining the answer. You demonstrate knowledge by spotting the detail everyone else missed, by asking the right question, by moving through uncertainty with steady hands instead of nervous chatter filling the space. People respect what they have to reach for, not what gets shoved at them. When you know something works, you don't perform it or convince anyone, you just do the work. Your hands stay calm. Your voice doesn't climb. You finish faster than expected because you weren't performing. You were just competent. That absence of ego, that refusal to fill silence with self-promotion is exactly what makes people stop mid-sentence and think, who is this person? It's the difference between someone who talks about being good and someone too busy actually being good to mention it. Quiet competence doesn't ask for respect. It collects it like change you didn't know you dropped. The real trick isn't doing more or knowing more. It's letting your work speak while you stay still. There's a magnetic pull in restraint that no amount of talking ever builds. When you choose silence over proving yourself, you become the person everyone else wants to know. The written follow-up summary. You sit through a meeting, nod at all the right moments, shake hands at the end, and by tomorrow, everyone half remembers what you agreed to. Then someone sends a 3-sentence recap email, and suddenly they own the narrative. That's not luck. They just understood that your voice doesn't stop when you leave the room. Here's what happens neurologically. Spoken words evaporate. Your brain prioritizes the last thing it sees before moving on to the next threat or task. A written summary lands in someone's inbox, gets reread, gets forwarded, gets printed. It becomes the official record. And if you're the one writing it, you're the one who gets to frame what mattered, what was decided, and what comes next. The trick isn't fancy. Within a few hours of something important, a negotiation, a pitch, a difficult conversation, send a brief, simple recap, not a novel. 3 to 5 bullet point sentences. What we discussed, what we agreed on, what happens next, who does what. Keep it generous toward the other person's ideas so they don't feel ambushed by your version. Make it look like you're being helpful, not controlling. The writing itself builds authority because you're the only one thinking clearly enough to document it. People take you seriously partly because you finish things they left hanging. You tie the bow, you make it official. The person who writes the summary walks away with the power, not because they're bossy, but because they're organized, deliberate, and the only one in the room thinking 3 steps ahead. That follow-up is your last word. Use it. The premeditated exit line. Watch how the people you respect most leave a room. They don't drift away mid-thought or fumble toward the door. They know when the conversation has peaked and they step out clean, warm, and intentional. This is not rude at all. It signals that your time is valuable, that you respect the other person enough not to overstay, and that you know exactly where the boundary is. A premeditated exit line is a sentence you decide on before entering a conversation, something simple that leaves them thinking about what you said instead of watching you trail off into silence. Think, I want to make sure I let you get back to your day, or that's the thought that matters most. I'll leave you with it. The magic lives in the contrast. Most people over-explain, repeat themselves, or keep talking to fill the awkward space. They blur the ending and weaken the impact. You do the opposite, cutting it at the peak. The listener's brain registers this as confidence and genuine respect, not coldness or dismissal. They remember the strongest moment, not the weak trailing off that makes you seem uncertain. Before your next important conversation, jot down one exit line that feels true to you. Not a script, just a frame that closes the door while keeping it open for next time. When you actually use it, watch what happens. People lean in harder because they know you're not desperate to hold their attention. You already have it. That refusal to drag things past their natural end, that cleanness, that clarity, that is what makes people take you seriously.